Chapter 437. An indescribable force burst out from behind him. Soren's face changed in an instant. He picked up the Lolita dragon beside him and immediately activated haste. His whole body flew away like a shadow. As one of the few top rogues in the Underdark who had seen the body of the Queen of Spiders, Soren had received many missions when he was among the drows. Perhaps because the reputation accumulated from the missions was too high, Soren's name gradually reached the ears of the Queen of Spiders at that time, and she forced him to accept a difficult mission. Is that the Queen of Spiders? The expression on the Lolita dragon's face was also a little panicked. As a dragon, she easily slept all the way to the legendary realm, but what just happened in front of her completely shattered her past confidence. Perhaps mortals were as weak as ants in her eyes, but in fact, they were also like ants in the eyes of some existences. Soren nodded slowly. Then a familiar force emerged, and suddenly he recalled the memory of several times when he met the Queen of Spiders. Life and death. Shard of divinity, death's hand. Godhood of assassination. As a top rogue who had faced the incarnations of the gods several times, Soren knew the terrible power of the old gods too well. Compared with a terrible existence like the Queen of Spiders, legends were just as insignificant as a speck of dust. There were many records about the fall of the Arcane Empire, but in fact, there had always been a conspiracy theory that the fall of the Arcane Empire was because they threatened the rule of the gods. The power of the great arcanists was too strong, and the field of their research also involved the realm of the gods, so they fell overnight for some reason. During the period of the Arcane Empire, its influence spread throughout the multiverse, and there were millions of legendary professions inside. Conspiracy theorists believed that no one except the gods could eliminate so many legendary professions in one breath. Gods. The field that Soren was exploring little by little was also a field beyond the imagination of mortals. In theory, gods were invincible, or at least, they could not be defeated by mortals, because this was the rule set by the gods. Throughout history, the fall of the gods had always been due to internal strife. Examples of mortals killing gods could be counted on one hand. If it wasn't for the arrival of the Avatar crisis, a god with weak divine power could also kill a group of legendary professionals. Gods are almost invincible in their divine kingdoms. Within the domain of the gods, a single ability of form change, reality change, or size change, is enough to easily change your body into any form that they wish to see. For non-divine creatures, some gods who have mastered the divine domain of death, slaughter, and destruction can directly erase the life of the other party. Deities are immune to the majority of negative status effects, and they always take the maximum value of the immunity test. Only gods in the form of saints can be killed by mortals. The Rules of God Slaying, Volume 1, Chapter 3, by D.K.J.W.R. Far away from the battlefield. Just as the Queen of Spiders' figure disappeared, a blurry and distorted shadow quietly retreated. I failed. The power of the Queen of Spiders is too strong. We mistakenly estimated the power of the Queen of Spiders based on the strength of the god of half-elves and rogues. Even if we have increased the amount of power difference by nearly 100 times, the gap between the two sides is still too big. The battle plan failed, and only one member of the God Slayer tactical team survived. The coordinates of the half-bit wall seem to have been locked by the Queen of Spiders. Request support from the astral floating tower to retreat. I must return to the sigil and bring the news back to the Church of Non-Gods. The shadow quickly disappeared into the darkness. On the other side, Soren finally slowed down a little after putting enough distance between them. He looked at the Lolita dragon in front of him and said with a serious expression, "Things are a little beyond our expectations. If even the Queen of Spiders has appeared, then I'm afraid we can't stay in the Underdark for a while." The Avatar Crisis. The act of killing a god before the Avatar Crisis began would definitely arouse the anger of the Queen of Spiders. Soon, a terrible purge would spread to all parts of the Underdark. At least before the Avatar Crisis officially broke out, the Queen of Spiders would need to vent her anger. For now, although the gods had sensed something, none of them knew what was about to happen. Soren was probably the one who knew the content of the Avatar Crisis best. To some extent, this should be the only obvious advantage he had over many gods. No one knew when the Avatar crisis would break out, how strong the outbreak would be, and how large the scope of the impact would be. Even the gods who were resisting the chaotic energy could only vaguely guess the general direction. So during this period of time, there were actually a lot of tentative actions. Not only the gods were testing other gods, but other powerful organizations were also testing various targets. Everything that happened today. Soren had no impression of it in the past, which meant that it happened before other adventurers entered the Underdark. Although he didn't know the origin of the team of professionals who attacked the Queen of Spiders, Soren could roughly guess that they had a great relationship with the Arcane Empire, because the whole battle plan seemed quite sci-fi, and the premise of all this was that they needed the falling of the Arcane Empire to complete a huge tactical calculation. Soren had encountered this kind of fighting method before, but it was not as scary as today. If the target was not the Queen of Spiders, they would have succeeded today. Any god below the mid-level divine power could be defeated by this level of tactic. Unfortunately, they chose the wrong target. They chose the Queen of Spiders, who was already a great divine power and in charge of too many clergies and domain powers. He didn't know why they wanted to kill the Queen of Spiders. However, Soren was not surprised. After all, the Queen of Spiders was famous for attracting firepower, and her enemies were already countless. As early as the mid-level divine power, which was before the Battle of the Queen of Spiders broke out, the Queen of Spiders, Lolth, was already fighting the entire Elven divine system alone. It was not surprising. If the Queen of Spiders wasn't so powerful, Soren wouldn't have turned around and run away when he saw her. As for why someone would think of killing her, Soren didn't quite understand the reason. In his memory, there were only a few existences who would take such a risk and be so hostile to the Queen of Spiders. For example, the churches of gods and non-gods, an exploration organization in the astral plane, or some powerful force that he didn't know. Note, before the establishment of the Drows, the Queen of Spiders was more alone against the Elven divine system. However, as a goddess who was good at using conspiracy, she would also find some powerful allies. Queen of Spiders. The Lolita dragon lowered her head and muttered to herself. Since the beginning of the incident, she seemed to be a little depressed, and her whole person seemed to be absent-minded, as if there was something on her mind. But at this time, Soren didn't have time to think so much. The battle at the beginning was too terrifying. He might not even be able to hold on for a second under such a tactical attack. As for the Queen of Spiders' strong counterattack after taking all the attacks, Soren wasn't surprised at all. At present, the Avatar crisis hadn't completely broken out, and the Queen of Spiders hadn't been completely deprived of her divinity. Unless several other gods with great divine power joined forces, it was basically impossible to kill her. Many tactics seemed strong, but they were useless against some existences. For example, someone once wanted to kill the Queen of Succubus, who didn't seem to be very strong, but when they really wanted to do it, they found that they couldn't even pass through the aura of seductive beauty. In the end, the Queen of Succubus casually opened the domain of fallen desire, and the group of people began to play the shameful game that they would regard as a lifetime of shame. There was more light in front of them. There was a strange fluorescent plant growing nearby, but as soon as they got close, Soren's expression changed, and he put his hand on the hilt of icing death. In front of them appeared a figure on the ground. From the outline, it should be a woman. Her exposed skin was very pale, and her face was covered with a veil, so they couldn't see her face clearly. However, Soren saw a familiar symbol on her body. His heart couldn't help but thump, and he thought to himself, the Godslayer organization? A psionic warlock? When Soren turned the woman over, he and the little Lolita next to him couldn't help but look at each other in surprise. The little Lolita frowned slightly, and after a glance, she said, "She's dying." Soren nodded slowly. Yes. She's dying. A powerful psionic warlock with a profession level of more than level 30 was so easily killed by the Queen of Spiders. Soren spread out her wrist and saw a dark green symbol that looked like a black widow on it. He couldn't help but murmur, "Assassination priesthood. Craftiness domain. It's the curse of the Queen of Spiders." she's basically hopeless. Since the battle of the Queen of Spiders, Lolita had been coveting other powerful priesthoods or corresponding priesthoods. Craftiness domain. Basically, not many people who were cursed by the Queen of Spiders could survive. Sigh. The little Lolita slightly looked at the psionic warlock, whose breath was fading, and said slowly, unless a god gives her a new life, she's basically dead now. Time froze. When he heard this sentence from her mouth, Soren's eyes couldn't help but burst into light. He seemed to have thought of something. Chapter 438. There was once a boring debate. That was, the world before Soren came here, and the world he was in now, which one was stronger? Although the lethality of nuclear cleansing made many people proud, in fact, it was useless for many existences. Not to mention the powerful gods, just the ability of a professional to advance into a psionic warlock was enough to end the debate. The psionic warlock's ability to control ordinary people was too strong, and after advancing into the legendary realm, they also had the ability to take over others. Soren looked at the psionic warlock in front of him. For him, the target in front of him had a very attractive aspect, and that was the ability of the psionic warlock to telepathic suggestion. This ability didn't have much lethality, but it could affect the minds of ordinary people. It could be simply understood as the most powerful hypnotism. If it was performed by a legendary psionic warlock, then the range of coverage would be quite wide. The psionic warlock could control the minds of ordinary people and leave some hints in their hearts. This ability may not be very useful in other places, but if it was used in the direction of spreading faith and developing believers, then its effect would become quite amazing. The reason why Soren thought of this was that there was a professional who borrowed the ability of the psionic warlock. Although because of this move, the professional who advanced into the divine also fell into the evil camp, but it did not matter. He was originally a neutral existence, and falling into the evil camp only meant that he had more enemies. But relying on the control ability of the psionic warlock, the professional developed the divine church from nothing in a short time, and became an existence that could fight against the old divine church. This was the value of the psionic warlock. They could directly create the first batch of believers out of thin air. Soren had advanced into the demigod realm. To some extent, he was already in a situation where there was no way out, and the threat of the demigod vampire was still there. Although he could temporarily hide in the outer islands with Vivian, they could still be found in the end. To fight against the gods, they still needed the power of the gods. Even if Soren was confident that he could unite with Gloria to deal with the demigod vampire, with the addition of the divine church behind the other party, the chances of winning were quite low. The growth of the church was very fast. Soren could train a batch of pirates who were good at fighting, but the church could train even more powerful professionals. If he didn't speed up, the distance between them would only grow larger and larger. He had divinity. He also had a godhood. The only thing Soren lacked now was a divine domain that matched his abilities and identity. As long as he could obtain a divine domain that he could fuse with, he could slowly enter the realm of a true god. He possessed divine power. Develop believers. To train priests. With these three conditions, and with the population, resources, and wealth of the outer islands as backing, Soren was 70% sure that even if the Avatar crisis came, he would be able to withstand it. As for Vivian's troubles, Soren, who stood at the height of a deity, would naturally have an easier time dealing with them. For example, how to completely erase the existence of the dread demon god. This point. Perhaps only a true god could do that. Soren stared at the psionic warlock in front of him. Her face was pale, and her life force was almost depleted. This was the domain of the Queen of Spiders. Soren had seen such a terrible curse, which directly killed a drow matriarch who went against her will. Even in the internal struggles of the drows, if a family did something that angered the Queen of Spiders, then the Queen of Spiders might directly kill all the higher-ups of the family with craftiness, and finally send the spider elves to destroy the remaining members of the family. There were actually many families that were destroyed, but it was mainly concentrated in the period before the fall of the Dark Maiden. After the fall of the Dark Maiden, the Queen of Spiders had not carried out a bloody purge for a long time. There was only one way to save her. To fight against the curse of the Queen of Spiders, only the power of a deity could do it. Divine bestowal. This was the only way Soren could think of to save her. As for the requirement of divine bestowal, that was, her attitude towards Soren, this was not a problem at all. The woman in front of him was a legendary psionic warlock. If she wanted to hypnotize herself to a certain extent, it would be a matter of a blink of an eye. The most important thing was what she was thinking in her heart. Was she going to die like this, or did she want Soren to save her? A deep breath. A glimmer of divine light appeared in Soren's eyes. A demigod could already mobilize the power of divinity. Although many of them did not appear as abilities, they were just instincts that Soren had mastered. For example, telepathy. After becoming a demigod, he could communicate with any intelligent creature. Soren could directly use his divine power to convey his thoughts to the other party's mind. I can save you. Soren held the psionic warlock in front of him in his arms, looked directly into the other party's eyes with the brilliance of divinity, and conveyed his own consciousness into the other party's mind. He slowly said, "But the price is that you must become my believer. There are many things that I can't make clear now. The only promise I can give you is that you won't have a bad life in the future. Time is running out. Make your choice as soon as possible. If you delay for too long, I'm afraid I can't save you." Divine bestowal. This was a very powerful ability. But the price paid was also quite serious. For example, the mutant killer whale that Soren's divinity bestowed was basically impossible to recover the lost divinity. As the price of absorbing divinity, the mutant killer whale's will and life were almost controlled by Soren. In theory, Soren could directly use the control of divine power to take away its life. The gods were the supreme beings. Even if the psionic warlock in front of him was a legendary class, once she chose to accept Soren's divine power, then her life was in the hands of Soren. There was no doubt about it. The gods controlling their believers was essentially no different from the demons controlling their followers. It was just that the demons' behavior was more arbitrary, evil, and cruel, while the gods were much more restrained, and there were many good gods who were very protective of their believers. Divine bestowal was a brand on the soul level. As long as it was formed, it was difficult to get rid of it, unless there was something that involved a higher level than the gods. Life or death. This choice was not very difficult. However, as a powerful psionic warlock, maybe she would rather die than be controlled by Soren in the future. If this was the case, Soren could only kill her at the last moment. After all, sometimes he was really cold-blooded. Except for Vivian, Soren really did not care much. Maybe now there was also Gloria. 1 second was as long as a day. There was not much time left for the psionic warlock in front of him, so when Soren received her reply, he immediately pressed his palm on her forehead. Divine bestowal. A strange divine radiance appeared. The divine power in Soren's body gradually passed to the psionic warlock in front of him. Under the light of divinity, her whole body was covered with a layer of strange gray energy. This was the Queen of Spiders' arcane field, and it was also a special field of the gods. 1 point of divinity. 2 points of divinity. 3 points of divinity. The divinity in Soren's body was slowly decreasing. As the divinity was injected little by little, the strange gray energy in the psionic warlock's body became thinner and thinner. Instead, it was replaced by the divine power transmitted by Soren. With the influx of divine power, Soren's ability to sense her became stronger. In the end, they even formed a telepathic communication between the two. This meant that the psionic warlock in front of him had opened her mind and began to rapidly change her attitude in the way of self-hypnosis, and finally integrated with the divine power transmitted by Soren. 5 points of divinity. When half of the strange gray energy was expelled, Soren decisively stopped the divine bestowal. He only had 11 points of divinity left. If this continued, he would fall from minor divinity. 5 points of divinity were enough to save the psionic warlock's life. As for the other half of the energy, he could only think about it later. The Queen of Spiders was powerful. But it was not that there were no gods who could fight against her. In essence, the curse was still the corrosive effect of negative energy. In the future, there would always be ways to eliminate it little by little. P.S. Status adjustment, heartbreak. Chapter 439. As an author who often makes stupid mistakes, it's not easy to write a good book for you guys to read. Stupid Stupa. The Frost Kingdom, Arendelle. The clouds of war had dispersed, and this rich and prosperous city had gradually regained its vitality. Although the legend of the pirate king Soren would still circulate in the taverns, making people constantly speculate about the relationship between the legendary pirate king and Princess Anna, people had gradually begun to get used to some changes in their lives. For example, there were some more chambers of commerce at the port recently, where they could buy a lot of specialties from the south of the continent, and occasionally some luxury goods from the east. Merchants were actively fighting for access to the southern sea route, although they had to pay a price to buy the passage issued by the pirate king Soren. But the rich profits were still enough to attract the attention of merchants. Recently, some people said that the legendary pirate king had built a sea kingdom. He ruled a large area of the sea and made his own rules in the sea. With more and more understanding of the southern coast, many merchants who went to the southern sea route for the first time agreed. Because only by buying the passage issued by the pirate king could they safely reach the south coast all the way. There were even pirate ships on the sea to escort their merchant ships. This was definitely a rare occurrence in hundreds of years. But without the passage issued by the pirate king, they could guarantee that the merchant ship would be on the sea route for at most a day or two, and then the whole ship would be washed clean with blood, and in the end, nothing would be left. Soren's methods were absolutely cruel. The key to everything was the quantity. If Soren took 50% of the profits, the merchants would definitely complain. But if he could leave 50% of the profits to the merchants and ensure their safety, then the merchants would gradually get used to it after the initial discomfort. In fact, people's ability to adapt was quite fast. Recently, even merchants on other routes were preparing to get a passage, so that they could ask Soren's fleet to escort them until they left the territory of the Vrykul pirates. Recently, the Vrykul pirates were having a hard time. It was said that one or two very fierce and overbearing pirate leaders had come to the south coast, and their pirate minions were quite good at fighting. They even fought with the Vrykul pirates several times and still couldn't win. The rules on the sea were changing little by little, and those who could not adapt would be eliminated. Chaos was the real disaster. Order, even if it was evil, would bring prosperity. Soren's exploitation did not dampen the enthusiasm of the merchants. After careful calculation, the merchants who were chasing after profits were surprised to find that they still had considerable profits after obtaining the rights to the route, and their safety was also guaranteed. The war in the south was spreading little by little, but the Frost Kingdom was still relatively peaceful. Many goods sold well after being shipped there, especially food. A ship of grain could actually earn twice the profit, and it would be sold out as soon as it reached the port. Note, the price of grain has doubled. On this day. It was a special day for Arendelle. Because on this day, a blue door of light suddenly opened in the sky above Arendelle. Then, under the gaze of tens of thousands of people, the noble figure of Princess Royal appeared like a goddess. She stood in the air and looked down at the city in front of her. Her crystal blue dress fluttered in the wind, and the sun shone down from behind Princess Royal, making her look like a goddess in the dawn. All the people who saw the Princess Royal couldn't help but cheer. Many people gathered in the streets and knelt down humbly towards the figure of Princess Royal. In just a moment, the whole of Arendelle was boiling. When the figure of Princess Royal appeared, the country in this world of ice and snow seemed to be full of vitality in an instant. Her Majesty Princess Royal was finally back. Arendelle was safe. In the eyes of the people in this country, it seemed that as long as the Princess Royal was still there, they had nothing to worry about. She's finally back. The Princess Royal's figure stood in the sky. She gazed at the cheering and joyful subjects below, and then her line of sight fell on the back of the azure light gate. There was a strange silver-white flowing light, and it was as gorgeous as a spreading cloud. This was a certain place in the star boundary. Princess Royal let out a faint sigh, and then gently waved her hand. A long ladder made of ice and snow emerged under her feet. She descended from the sky and walked towards the palace step by step. The long ladder made of ice and snow gradually dissipated after she left. But with a little strange aura, the whole of Arendelle was falling with crystal snowflakes. Sister. Princess Anna's figure had been waiting in front of the palace for a long time. When she saw the Princess Royal walking step by step in front of her, the little princess, who had been frightened for months, finally couldn't help but throw herself into the arms of the Princess Royal with slightly red eyes. Sister was finally back. Princess Anna couldn't help but cry. When she saw the figure of the Princess Royal, she finally couldn't help but vent the pressure that had been building for a long time. The meaning of the return of the Princess Royal was so different. At the bottom of the steps of the palace, the court witch and the female guard captain couldn't help but look at each other and felt relieved. As for the others in the palace, after seeing the figure of the Princess Royal, they seemed to have found their backbone. They became full of energy and enthusiasm. For the whole of Arendelle, the Princess Royal who had been in power since the age of 12 was really different. Her reputation in the kingdom was even above most of the monarchs in history. Of course, Soren didn't know about the return of the Princess Royal. In fact, he was now having a headache about another matter, and that was, the psionic warlock hadn't been completely rescued. The Lolita dragon, who initially planned to follow him on the adventure, was about to leave. It was inexplicable. It happened so suddenly that Soren wasn't prepared at all. The Lolita dragon standing beside him suddenly said that she was going to leave, and she didn't ask for Soren's opinion at all. She was just telling him the fact that she had decided to leave. Okay. You can't ask too much of your teammates from the Chaos faction. Since ancient times, chaos has always been the cause of chaos. This was a fact that had been confirmed countless times before it was confirmed by people. Are you really going to leave? Soren looked at the Lolita dragon in front of him and said with a helpless expression, if you leave now? I can't send you off. I'm afraid you'll have to leave the Underdark by yourself. The Lolita dragon's expression was a little complicated, but after a while, she nodded and said, no need. I can teleport away by myself. I'm going back to the Dragon Island. Even the Queen of Spiders has appeared in the mortal world. I'm a little worried about what will happen to my hometown. Soren looked at her and said in a deep voice, okay. Take care of yourself. Don't stay in the astral plane after teleporting. I'm afraid the astral plane isn't very safe recently. The Lolita dragon's hometown was definitely not in the material plane. Soren had been to the Dragon Island in the material plane. There were only a few dragons on it. The real Dragon Island was in the Dragon God's kingdom. Interplanar teleportation. The astral plane was an important transit station, but now the astral plane was not as safe as before. The Lolita dragon looked at Soren and hesitated. Soren. You should be very rich, right? Rich? This question made Soren stunned for a moment, but he still nodded and replied, I should be rich, right? Why do you ask? Borrow money? Soren had never heard of a dragon returning money after borrowing it. That's good. The Lolita dragon smiled when she heard this. She then raised her little white hand and motioned Soren to hand over her palm, and said, come. Put your hand like this. Soren was stunned. He seemed to have thought of something and obediently handed over his hand. Me. Princess Alice of the Brass Dragon Kingdom, abiding by the ancient contract, has formed an alliance with the human Soren in front of me. I swear in the name of the Dragon God. When an ally needs help, we will ask for a reasonable reward and help our ally get through the difficulties. In the name of the Brass Dragon. On behalf of the dragon race, I have formed a Dragon Alliance with the human in front of me. A strange magic light burst out. As the Lolita dragon in front of him completed some kind of oath in the strange dragon language, a row of data quickly appeared in front of Soren's eyes. Special situation triggered. Her Royal Highness Princess Alice of the Brass Dragon Kingdom requests to form a Dragon Alliance with you. This is the oldest soul contract, requires 50,000 slaughter EXP. Do you want to form an alliance? It really was a dragon alliance. Soren almost didn't think much and chose to pay the slaughter EXP. This was a kind of soul contract. It was equivalent to directly extracting a part of the soul energy. However, Soren's slaughter EXP was the source of soul energy, so he could use the slaughter EXP to replace the consumption of the Dragon Alliance. A magical power spread. Accompanied by an indescribable feeling, Soren and the Lolita dragon in front of him formed the most sacred Dragon Alliance. Of course. This contract was only sacred to the dragon race. In fact, with their overbearing and arrogant character, this contract was in fact very harsh in many cases. Dragon Alliance, legendary ability, you and Her Royal Highness Princess of the Brass Dragon clan have formed a sacred Dragon Alliance. From now on, you can directly summon the brass dragons in the multiverse by means of a contract by paying 10,000 slaughter EXP, interdimensional teleportation, minimum summon is an adult dragon. The Sacred Dragon Alliance can transmit requests to most of the brass dragons. The targets of the summoning include the ancient dragons and the ancient dragons of the Brass Dragon clan. However, please note that this kind of help is not without a price. Using the Dragon Alliance will cost at least 100,000 Kindler coins, and it is possible to summon 1 to 3 adult brass dragons to your summon. The more powerful the dragon you summon, the more you need to pay. Note, if you are unable to pay the dragon a satisfactory reward, you may be attacked by the dragon, or the effect of the Dragon Alliance will be cancelled. But if the reward you pay is very satisfactory to the dragon, and even spread a reputation among the dragons for being generous, then you may be able to summon the ancient dragons and the ancient dragons to help when needed. Data 1, the Dragon Alliance, sometimes appears as a spell above the 7th circle. This spell is to randomly summon other types of dragons. In most cases, it is because some gods or other beings have formed a rather ancient covenant with the ancient dragons. This covenant has been passed down for thousands of years, and it has not been cancelled because of a breach of contract, so it eventually evolved into a spell. Some spellcasters of certain forces can inherit this covenant and use spells to summon the dragons to help. Data 2, Soren is now equivalent to the first generation to have the Dragon Alliance. If he does not lose the qualification of the Dragon Alliance for some reason, then in the future, if he becomes a god or some kind of existence above the mortal world, his future priests or spellcasters can inherit the Dragon Alliance he has formed now. Data 3, the Dragon Alliance is one of the few abilities that requires slaughter EXP. Even as a spell memory, slaughter EXP is required. And this summoning is the most expensive summoning ritual. Chapter 440. The Dragon Covenant. It was one of the most famous abilities in the multiverse to throw money at others. Many people in history had obtained this ability. Perhaps it was because the ability to summon top-level fighters was too cool, and many of them went bankrupt because of it. In fact, the most powerful force that retained the highest level of the Dragon Covenant, which was the Dragon City that Soren mentioned, rarely used this ability. The reason was simple. Most of the dragons only took in money and did not spend it. Even if they earned money, they would not spend it. The result was obvious. The more powerful the dragon was, the higher the reward. Most of the time, the summoned dragons came from other worlds, and they would leave with the reward. The amount of money spent over a long period of time was actually quite shocking. This was equivalent to reducing the amount of gold in the material plane. If they wanted to replenish it, they could only get it from other planes. The Wizard Alliances, how much did the Dragon Covenant cost us? Had a detailed overview. The departure of the lowly dragon made Soren a little helpless, but the Chaos faction was also famous for doing whatever they wanted. Sometimes, Soren was a little envious of them. But it was just envy. Soren would never be able to do whatever he wanted like them. He was a person who was used to doing things according to his own rules. The psionic warlock still seemed to have not woken up. The power of divinity did not immediately fuse with her body, or the fusion needed a process. She might even be a little resistant to being controlled by Soren deep in her heart. The progress of divinity fusion is very slow. Soren closed his eyes and could feel the divinity he gave transforming the woman in front of him. He could easily find one thing on her, which was that there was almost no way for ordinary creatures to absorb divinity on their own. Whether it was the mutant killer whale in the beginning or the woman in front of him, it seemed that they needed time to fuse with the divinity. At this time, Soren realized how amazing his ability to fuse with divinity in the blink of an eye was. It seemed that he could fuse with both divinity and divinity very quickly. Others, even if they were gods, would need a long time to fuse with them bit by bit. This might be related to killing, or it might be for other reasons. Since he hasn't woken up yet. Soren looked at the psionic warlock in front of him and gently took off the veil on her face. Her pale face had gradually recovered its rosy color. The outline of the other party's face made him a little stunned. It wasn't that the psionic warlock was ugly. On the contrary, she was full of charm. But the key was not her beauty, but her face reminded Soren of the Githyanki's. The psionic warlock in front of him had some Githyankian features on her face. The Githyanki's were an astral race. Their appearance was very different from humans. If one had to describe them specifically, the Githyanki's had a bit of a snake spirit face. Their ears were very sharp, and there were obvious protrusions on their backs and spines. There were many differences in their specific appearance, so Soren could tell that she had the blood of the Githyanki's just by taking off her veil. Soren's expression suddenly turned serious. He reached out to take off the woman's robe and observed the area below her collarbone. There was a dark blue snake-like mark there. Soren reached out and groped the other party's chest, then his fingers touched the spine from above the psionic warlock's buttocks little by little. He could clearly feel that her spine was slightly protruding about half a centimeter compared to ordinary people. This meant that she was a hybrid of human and Githyanki's, in which the human bloodline accounted for most of it, and the Githyanki's bloodline was only a small part. The astral races were predatory. They might capture humans as slaves, so it was not ruled out that there were hybrids for some reason. Finally, Soren lifted the sleeve on her wrist, and 3 dark blue letters could be seen on her white wrist. MSS. The traces of the letters were already very faint, or they had faded because of the spread of the skin. This meant that the imprint had been left behind very early on, most likely during her childhood, and then gradually faded as her body grew. Soren slowly pulled down the sleeve, looked at the psionic warlock in front of him with a complicated expression, and murmured, "Slave?" The mark of a slave. Soren found it hard to imagine that such a powerful psionic warlock was actually a lowly slave in the past. Such a mark was only a blink of an eye for her to erase, but she chose to leave the mark of a slave on her body. There was probably a legendary story behind it. Soren had no good feelings about the Githyanki's. This race had been enslaved by the Mind Flayer Empire for a long time, but after breaking free from slavery, they did not become much better. Instead, they became the most dangerous plunderers and robbers in the astral world. The Githyanki's captured other races as slaves and maintained their brutal rule with militarized management. It seemed that any race that had been controlled by the Mind Flayer would eventually be destroyed by them. And most of them had psionic powers. The Githyanki's were like this, and so were the Duergar. Sigh. Soren raised his hand and stroked the psionic warlock's long hair, but suddenly he seemed to have touched something, and his whole body could not help but stiffen in place. Wound. Wound on the brain. Although it was not obvious, Soren could feel it through her hair. Mind Flayer? Soren looked very surprised. The expression on his face seemed to be a little unbelievable, and he murmured, "Was she not a slave of the Githyanki's? The one who once controlled her and left the mark of a slave was the Mind Flayer? Such a wound." This kind of wound was a little shocking even after it healed. In Soren's knowledge, there was only one kind of monster that would leave such a wound, and that was the Mind Flayer. Because they would suck the brains of other creatures. She was attacked by the Mind Flayer. Soren reached out his hand to the other side of the psionic warlock's cheek, and he touched a second similar wound. Now Soren was basically sure that it was the Mind Flayer, but it was hard for him to imagine that a slave who had been controlled and attacked by the Mind Flayer did not become an idiot or a lunatic, but instead became a legendary psionic warlock with a profession level of more than 30. This was simply too shocking. Perhaps the woman in front of him had a legendary story that was not inferior to Soren's. Phew. Soren's eyes were a little complicated, and there was a little pity in them. He rarely sympathized with others, but the woman in front of him actually made him sympathize with her, and there was a trace of respect in his sympathy. In the past, there were adventurers who challenged the Mind Flayer's lair and were captured by the Mind Flayer because they lost the battle. At that time, they would rather commit mass suicide than have their brains sucked by the Mind Flayer. To be able to survive that kind of environment and go all the way to the top of the legendary realm. Such a woman was worthy of Soren's respect. Let's leave here first. Soren seemed to feel some kind of energy fluctuation. After becoming a demigod, his ability to sense energy had been greatly strengthened, so he thought for a moment and decided to leave with the psionic warlock first. Soren raised his hand to help her put on the robe that she had taken off, and then fastened the buttons on her chest. Then he carried the psionic warlock's delicate body, and his whole body turned into a shadow and moved toward the passage out of the Underdark. The elemental stone, legendary level 3, was in his hand. He also got the shard of divinity. Soren felt that there was no need for him to stay here for the time being. The risk and the reward were completely unequal. Unknown land, half-plane. The space here was slightly shaking, and the edge of the half-plane had signs of collapse. It was like the domain of the nether storm. The ground that made up the half-plane was gradually collapsing, and the violent energy was destroying the structure of the half-plane world. Outside the half-plane was a deep darkness, as if a terrible force had passed through the space and locked this place. One was a small world, and the other was a big world. The collision of energy caused cracks to appear in the space, and finally, a hole suddenly appeared in the sky of the half-plane, and then the figure of the Queen of Spiders slowly appeared. So it's the Nirvana half-plane. The Queen of Spiders looked down at the world in front of her. On her back were 8 twisted spider legs, and when they opened, they looked like skeletons that were wings. Her expression seemed a little playful and a little surprised, and then she smiled and said, "I thought all half-planes like this had disappeared. I didn't expect there to be one hidden." Half-plane. One of the trademarks of the Arcanists. Everyone knew that the floating city had powerful combat power, but many people didn't know that another important structure of the floating city was the half-plane. The half-plane and the floating city were one. The great Arcanists created their own floating city, and then developed their own half-plane with the floating city as the foundation. If that wasn't the case, they wouldn't have the qualifications to challenge the high and mighty gods. Let me end all of this. The Queen of Spiders laughed wildly and raised her hand to the sky, and then a dark crack appeared in the sky of the half-plane. The next moment, a large number of monsters appeared in the sky, and they rushed to the half-plane like a raging torrent. Spider elves, demon spiders, wax demons, enchanted drows, abyss petitioners. Endless monsters appeared in the dark crack, and the moment they appeared, they began to kill mercilessly and madly rushed to the arcane tower at the end of the half-plane. Servants of the Queen of Spiders. Terrible monsters from the kingdom of gods, abyss of demons. When the kingdom of the gods locked this half-plane, a portal across the plane was also formed by powerful divine power. This was not a material plane. The boundary of the material plane could not affect here, and the gods could directly open a portal to the kingdom of gods in outer space. This was not an ordinary battle. When the portal to the kingdom of abyss of demons, was opened, it had become a war of the gods. P.S. Today's update will be updated at 3. This month's update volume will be increased. Chapter 441. Alert. Alert. Intruder detected. Intruder detected. A translucent light screen appeared on the surface of the arcane tower as a cold metallic sound rang out. Thaling's figure appeared at the top of the arcane tower and said coldly, "Activating level 1 combat readiness. Activating the defensive force field of the arcane tower. Activating defensive battle plan. Activating the golem army. Rumble. Asterisk rumble. The walls of the arcane tower suddenly caved in, followed by a series of loud footsteps. Puppet golems walked out of the arcane tower one after another. These golems were not of the material plane's craftsmanship at all. The lowest grade among them were steel golems with special craftsmanship. As for the other diamond golems, magic power devices, magic power guards, and so on, there were countless of them. The civilization of the Arcane Empire not only gave them powerful close combat abilities, but also gave many golems anti-air abilities and various long-range energy attacks. However, the final result did not change at all. The defensive force field of the arcane tower shattered easily like an eggshell. The golem army was easily surrounded by the monsters that surged out of the spatial rift, and then all of them were torn apart into scrap metal. A divine kingdom. A divine kingdom belonging to the gods. After the believers died, they would be reborn in the divine kingdom. Most devout believers would become petitioners, and become natives of the divine kingdom. A small number of fanatical believers would become powerful Holy Spirits. Some would even be directly in the form of angels, and the gods would use their powerful divine power to reconstruct their physical bodies. Since the birth of the angels, many gods had tried to turn their fanatical believers into angels. However, due to the good and evil of the factions, sometimes they would be divided into otherworld apostles and fallen apostles. These two were extremely similar to the form of angels. After the believers were reborn in the divine kingdom, they would have almost infinite life. The price of this near-eternal life made them a part of the divine kingdom, and their own life and death were completely one with the gods themselves. Petitioners could not leave the divine kingdom. Only in the case of a war of the gods could they participate as the backbone of the gods on one side. For any god, if they sent all their petitioners into battle, it meant that they were ready to fight to the death. A long time. The kingdom of God was like an energy storage pool. The church would develop believers in other planes, and the God would select the best believers and lead them to the kingdom of God. Many of these believers would become petitioners and Holy Spirits, while some would exist as ordinary reincarnations. The quality of the soul and the devotion of the faith would determine the identity of the believer after they entered the divine kingdom. This was like a soul that had fallen into the bottomless abyss. Some people could directly transform into higher demons, while others could only transform into abyssal worms, monster level 1. There's a big difference, right? However, that was the rule of the multiverse. The power of the soul would be magnified by the rules of other dimensions after losing the physical body. For example, Soren. If he accidentally died, with the purity of his soul and his willpower, as long as his soul didn't die for some reason, it would be easy for him to reincarnate into a higher demon. However, at that time, he had already forgotten too much. Any reincarnation would erase a large amount of memory, even for the believers of the gods. After entering the gods' kingdom, they would only retain the memory of their devout faith, while the other memories would gradually fade until they completely disappeared. Note, Partial Analysis of the Kingdom of God, Volume 3. How many believers did the Queen of Spiders have? She had ruled the Drows for a long time. In the long river of time, the Queen of Spiders had new believers entering her kingdom every day. Perhaps some of these believers would be consumed in the battle with other gods, but the total number was still increasing. Otherwise, the abyss of demons would not have become the size of a plane. Note, the unknown relationship between the petitioners and the size of the kingdom of God, Volume 1. It was rare for outsiders to enter the kingdom of the gods. No one could really figure out what was in the abyss of demons, but just by looking at the corner, the power that the Queen of Spiders had accumulated over a long time was quite terrifying. There were not many petitioners. The ones in charge were a black mass of demon spiders and various monsters that had been punished by the Queen of Spiders. They were like cannon fodder that drowned everything. The Queen of Spiders didn't care about the consumption of these creatures at all. Thousands. More and more demon spiders appeared, as well as other unspeakable monsters. Looking through the dimensional cracks in the sky, a huge forest could be vaguely seen from the darkness. This forest looked like a huge spider web, and in the middle was a palace that looked like a spider mother. This was Loltha's kingdom. Or, this was only a part of the kingdom of God. Damn it. These annoying guys are really haunting me. The demigod vampire stared at the front with a gloomy expression. In front of him was a team of fully armed paladins, but this was not the key to everything. The key was that one of the paladins held a weapon that even he was afraid of. Although the weapon had not been unsheathed, the ability of the gods had made him feel danger. Very, very dangerous. A team of legendary paladins. Even the weakest one was a high-grade paladin. There were even high-grade priests of the god of justice, and some professions that he could not identify. It might be the advancement of the clergy. What are they going to do? A group of people came to the Underdark? Are they going to purify the evil here? The demigod vampire was ready to fight at any time. One of the paladins in front of him held a heavy hammer in one hand and a thick black coat in the other hand. This burly man actually gave him a lot of pressure. This was something that he had rarely encountered since his ascension as a vampire. A paladin who could threaten him was probably not a simple legendary figure. Codex Guardian, Judge, Arbiter. The Hellpemer's expression was also very serious. He seemed to have serious injuries on his body, and he did not know who left them. He directly communicated with his mind. It looks like a special legendary organization. That sword is quite dangerous. I'm worried that it is that thing. Not easy to deal with. The god of rogues and half-elves has been defeated by us. Our purpose has been achieved. I need some time to absorb his power. Let's find a way to get rid of these annoying guys. On the other side. The paladins looked at the two people in front of them with serious expressions. Even without any detection spells, they could feel the evil of the other party. Coming to the Underdark was quite a risky move. But they had a reason to come, so this time the lineup was quite luxurious. Even a legendary weapon had been brought here by them. Purify the evil? Standing on the side of the team was a clergy. He had the emblem of the god of light on his chest. In the past, he had been active in the front line against the demons. He came here only for some special personal reasons. At this moment, he looked at the demigod vampire in front of him and seemed to know his identity. He turned his gaze slightly to the paladin next to him and said, "Vampire Reinhardt. One of the sons of fear." He set off a bloody massacre in the south of the continent and turned many innocent people into vampire slaves. In the end, he became a false god with the identity of a vampire. After establishing the church, he has been operating secretly, but he has never stopped his evil plans. His believers have been doing evil everywhere, and the spread of vampires in many places is definitely related to him. Because of his existence, at least tens of thousands of people have been brutally killed. The atmosphere gradually became dignified. The surrounding space had long been locked. The paladin in the lead glanced at the two enemies in front of him, then slowly pressed his palm on the black tome and said in a deep voice, "Evil must be judged." This battle was almost inevitable. If they allowed these two evil enemies to leave just like that, then there would be an eternal hole in their future path. It was like seeing the demons wreaking havoc in the mortal world, but they themselves were indifferent. Moreover, it was not that they had no chance of winning, because this time they even brought out the Holy Avenger. A 5th-grade artifact. Although its power had not been fully restored and it was re-strengthened to a +6 artifact, as long as they had the Holy Avenger in hand, they had a high chance of winning even against the powerful evil gods. Item type, Holy Avenger, Karsamir, +5, item grade, 5th-grade artifact, item description. The Holy Avenger is the ultimate weapon of the paladins against evil forces. There is almost no evil in the lower planes that can fight against its power. Karsamir is a legendary weapon, perhaps one of the most powerful weapons in the material plane, but its origin and history have been completely forgotten. This sword has the power to make evil tremble in fear. Even the powerful evil gods and demons have heard of its name. But this was not its true power. This artifact was still missing its most important part. Equipment requirements, strength 14 and above. Can only be used by paladins. Equipment effect, artifact characteristics, magic resistance 50%, magic removal, 3 times, plus 15 sharpness, plus 10 penetration, plus 15 toughness, plus 10 armor break, plus 10 holy damage. Artifact effect, magic resistance. When holding this artifact, the user will increase magic resistance by 50%. Any spell will have a 50% chance of failure against the owner of the Holy Avenger. Weapon special effect, magic removal. When this weapon hits any enemy, it will cast a legendary magic removal effect on the target. Weapon characteristics, resist evil. When this weapon hits any evil enemy, it will cause an additional 10 holy damage to the target. Chapter 442. The departure of the Lolita dragon made Soren feel a little lonely. Along the way, he gradually got used to the talkative nature of the little Lolita. Suddenly, when she left, Soren always felt that something was missing. The psionic warlock still did not wake up. However, her vitality was gradually recovering. Soren's divine gift offset the curse of the Queen of Spiders. Even if there was still negative energy erosion, it was not enough to threaten her life. Boom! Suddenly, a violent vibration came from the front. This place was close to an exit of the Underdark. Soren's purpose of this trip was basically achieved. He had obtained the Shard of Divinity and completed the fusion of the elemental stone. There was no need to continue to stay here. So he originally planned to leave the Underdark from here, then take the psionic warlock back to the Outer Islands and find a way to ask a legendary priest to cast Greater Restoration on her. The Queen of Spiders personally did it, so ordinary methods were basically useless. It was estimated that only a legendary priest could give it a try. A priest of the goddess of wealth, a high priest of the sea temple. Soren could always think of a way to pay a price. After all, he had invested so much in the woman in his arms. Rumble. The violent vibration came again. Soren could now be sure that there was a battle in front of him, and it was on the way he had to pass through. The battle was near the exit. This was the only exit that was relatively close. The location of the battle made his heart skip a beat. Is it a drow? Or someone else? Soren found a remote corner and put down the psionic warlock in his arms. If there was a battle later, he would not be able to take care of her, so he could only put her aside first. Sneak. Soren's figure merged into the darkness and then approached the location of the battle little by little. The smell of blood. A very strong smell of blood. Before he got close to the area of the battle, Soren smelled blood. This smell of blood felt a little familiar to him and even awakened some kind of desire to kill in his heart. An existence that he wanted to kill very much. The god of vampires, Reinhardt. Vivian was currently the biggest threat. The existence of the demigod vampire had always been a thorn in Soren's side. The demigod vampire was like a knife hanging over their heads. He was one of the few people that Soren wanted to kill even in his dreams. Don't kill him. Vivian would be in danger. However, Soren was not a reckless person. He knew very well that he was no match for the demigod vampire. Even if he joined forces with Gloria and Vivian, they might not be able to defeat him. This was because saints were born to be above mortals. Even though Soren had become a demigod, he was still quite a distance away from becoming a saint. There was energy in the air. The smell of blood, the aura of darkness, the fluctuation of elements, the radiance of divine spells, and some kind of power that Soren felt very uncomfortable and fearful, but also somewhat familiar. What a terrifying power. It didn't come from a person. Soren's sixth sense as a demigod made him think that it came from something. Sixth sense. It seemed that after becoming a demigod, his sixth sense had become stronger. Bang! The sound of flesh hitting the wall, and some kind of magical flute sound. Just the moment he heard it, Soren's heart gave birth to a trace of despair, and even a feeling of despair that made him want to commit suicide. However, this feeling only lasted for a moment, and then Soren completely recovered, and was completely immune to the influence of the flute sound. Magic flute. There was a legendary bard here. It seemed like he was a bard from the fallen camp, because a normal bard would use the hero's movement to boost morale. It's really him. Soren's eyes suddenly burst out a ray of light, and then a crazy murderous intent surged in his heart. The demigod vampire, Reinhardt. Soren's feeling was not wrong. This smell of blood really came from his biggest threat, the god of vampires. However, the desire to kill in his heart did not make Soren rush out blindly. On the contrary, he retreated a little, and hid himself more in the shadows. He also saw another person. A very powerful bard. Soren had never seen a bard who could play a legendary war song, and also hold a long sword to fight against two paladins at the same time. This was simply unheard of. Soren did not even know if there was such a talent as battle performance, and whether it needed battle casting and mobile casting to support it at the same time. This bard completely overturned Soren's impression of him. His close combat skills were enough to make many high-level rogues feel ashamed. What kind of monster was this? Wasn't the bard a jack of all trades? When could it be so abnormal? Could he be the legendary Hellbard? Paladins? It's them. Why are they here? Soren's gaze turned to the other side. The paladins in front of him surprised him, because they were the ones he had met near the desert. Warden. The paladins of the Holy Avenger. Soren once revealed the location of the divine artifact, Tyr's Eye, to them as a deal. At that time, they made it clear that they would do anything to recover the divine Avenger's repair parts. However, Soren did not expect them to meet here. But counting the time, from the time Soren told them the location until now, these paladins should have already arrived in the Underdark. So they should have gotten the Tyr's Eye now and were ready to leave here and return to the surface world. And why was the demigod vampire here? Did they just happen to meet? Soren had a lot of doubts in his mind, but he could not guess the answer because everything could be a coincidence. If he did not tell the paladins that there was a divine artifact here, they would not have come to the Underdark. Maybe this is an opportunity. A trace of killing intent appeared in Soren's pupils, and he quietly moved along the edge of the battlefield. The battle was still going on. The demigod vampire and the Hellpemer obviously had the upper hand. Both of them had the strength of high-grade legends, and one of them was a god in the form of a saint. If it was an ordinary legendary profession, they would have already been killed by them. However, they were facing paladins after all. The restraining effect against the evil faction was obvious, and there was also a very strong cleric. The most important point was, whether it was the demigod vampire or the Hellpemer, they seemed to be afraid of something. They had been a little hesitant during the battle, as if they were afraid of the weapon on one of them. Even if this weapon had not been pulled out yet. Could it be? Soren seemed to have thought of something, and his face showed a trace of surprise. What kind of weapon could make the saint, the incarnation of a god, so afraid? In his memory, there seemed to be only a few, and the one that this group of paladins in front of him might be the most famous one among them. Divine Avenger, Karsamir +5. It was as if he had made some kind of decision. Soren stepped back a little, and then a strange ring appeared in his palm. Lich Ring +5. This powerful Tier 5 legendary equipment, Soren had not used it since the moment he got it. The reason was simple. Because this legendary equipment had a curse on it, after wearing it, it would reduce vitality by 2 points, and there was no way to take it off himself. He had to first remove the effect of the curse. Wearing it was equivalent to reducing HP by 1 point for every profession level. The reduction effect of vitality would directly affect the profession level. Soren's maximum HP was reduced by more than 20 points in one go. Unless it was an undead life form, there was no way for others to resist the curse effect of the Lich Rings +5. This equipment was a double-edged sword. If it was not necessary, Soren would not wear it for no reason. Elemental Crystal Stone. Soren entered a state of full preparation. Not only did he wear the cursed Lich Ring +5, but he also took out the fused Elemental Crystal Stone at the same time. Item type, Elemental Crystal Stone, Fusion. Item grade, Tier 3 Legendary. Item description, a special treasure from the elemental plane. After fusing earth, water, wind, and fire, it became a complete piece. It contains powerful magic, and can be activated to cast various spells or summon elemental creatures to fight. This elemental crystal stone seems to have some special traces after fusing. It may have some unknown origin. Equipment requirements: none. Special effects: Elemental Legion, 1x/3 days, Stone Skin, 3x/1 day, Ice Storm, 3x/1 day, Fireball, 3x/1 day, Lightning, 3x/1 day. The fused elemental crystal stone was very different. There was not much improvement in the spells that could be activated, which were Stone Skin, Ice Storm, Fireball, and Lightning. Although the number of times it could be used per day had increased, it was still only some low-level spells. The most important change was the Elemental Legion, because this was a legendary spell. Elemental Legion, legendary spell, activates the power of the elemental crystal stone to summon a group of giant fire elementals, earth elementals, water elementals, and wind elementals. The number of summoned creatures is 2 to 6, and it is possible to summon a legendary elemental elder. This was the most powerful ability. With this, it was equivalent to bringing an elemental legion with him. When needed, he could use a group of thugs to drown the enemy. Rogues were more afraid of being besieged. Because they could not withstand attacks, Soren needed this kind of meat shield that could share the firepower. The battle was still going on. Soren began to buff himself with spells, and at the same time, he approached the battlefield little by little. Lich Ring, Elemental Crystal Stone, Slaughter Transformation. Soren now had no idea of holding back. What he wanted to do most now was to cut off the head of the demigod vampire. Then Vivian would be safe. Chapter 443. Hell's Music. With the bard's footsteps, the sound of the magic flute suddenly began to sound like the mournful music played by a dead person. He held the magic flute in one hand and moved to play, while the other hand held a long sword to constantly parry the paladin's attacks. At the same time, when he moved, his toes would touch the ground from time to time, leaving a shallow pit that was not very obvious. The bard's footsteps were very light, and sometimes it even gave people the illusion that he was dancing, as if he was not fighting at all. The fighting skills of the sword dancer. And the dodging ability of the clown dancer. He also seems to have mastered some of the skills of the master player. How many skills of the same profession is this guy proficient in? He is definitely the Helphemer. Soren's expression became more and more serious, because in just a short time, he saw no less than 3 of the same profession's fighting skills from the bard. He even had no doubt that the bard in front of him could take out another weapon in the blink of an eye, and then use the dual weapon fighting skills to instantly perform the sword form, spinning strike. Only the Helphemer could raise a jack-of-all-trades class like the bard's to such a level, because this guy had lived for many years. If he really is the Helphemer, then the situation is not very good. Soren was very cautious to look for an opportunity. He knew a lot about the Helphemer, but this name was still very well known because the Helphemer was one of the few existences who had legendary fighting skills, legendary sneaking ability, and legendary casting ability at the same time. For a bard to be so strong that he could use the magic flute to cast a legendary spell, this made many mages want to cry. This guy was like the son of the plane who had used a cheating device. The average bard at most had second-rate fighting skills, second-rate sneaking ability, and third-rate casting ability. But the Helphemer's jumping steps in front of him gave Soren a very strong sense of crisis. Squeak. The music played by the magic flute suddenly stopped, and the Helphemer smiled and took back the long sword, and then gently pointed his fingertips to the front. Hell's Music, Chapter 4, Desire to Kill. Gate Between Worlds, Legendary Spell. At first, some inconspicuous magic lights appeared on the pits left by the Helphemer's movement. Then, they quickly formed a simple 9-pointed star array. When the strange mournful music stopped, it quickly formed a gate of otherworld in midair. In the next second, a terrifying roar was heard, and a malevolent greater demon appeared from the portal. However, after the demon appeared, its first target was none other than the Helphemer who had completed the summoning ritual. Protect from evil. A very simple magic light appeared, and the Helphemer faintly frowned, saying in a low voice, "Sure enough, demons are brainless." Summoning demons could easily backfire. However, a protection from evil buff would solve the problem. At the very least, it would force them to turn around and attack others. As expected. With the help of the Helphemer's spell, the summoned demon immediately turned around and charged at the paladin in front of it. Its huge body had many sharp appendages that flickered with a cold light like blades. The form of demons was uncertain. It was difficult for them to predict what they would look like because demons had a strong mutation type. Even if they wanted to, they could always maintain the form of abyss worm and advance to the legendary realm in battle. However, at that time, the legendary abyss worm would be as big as a dragon, and there would not be much difference in combat ability. In theory, lesser demons could control their form until they reached the legendary realm. If they were not killed, the summoned demon in front of him should be called an alien demon, a failed demon in advancing to the legendary realm. If it succeeded, it would become a Baylor. If it was a little worse, it could also become a six-armed Naga. If it was unlucky, it could maintain the form of a Berserker, Vrock, Glabrizu, and so on. Anyway, when its strength was promoted to the legendary realm, it did not look messy. The general difference between the forms of demons was still there, and it was considered a successful species. However, if it looked strange or became like a xenomorph, then it would be a failed mutation. Note, there were defective demon princes, which belonged to the strange kind. Failure did not mean that it was weak. In fact, the combat power of a failed product was stronger. The alien demon was stronger than an ordinary Baylor. The only flaw was that it did not have a brain, its soul was chaotic, and its thinking was completely controlled by the desire to kill. It was a lunatic among demons. If demons thought they were lunatics, then you can imagine how awkward the position of these alien demons would be. However, they were also demons that liked to respond to the summons of killing. These monsters thirsted for blood and death. As long as there was a chance to be summoned to other planes outside the abyss, they would always respond to the magic summons like a swarm of bees. So in theory, as long as these lunatics in the bottomless abyss were still there was no need to worry about the legendary spell not being able to summon a powerful demon. Alien demon, legendary creature. A monster that was more than 3 meters tall and weighed more than 8,000 pounds. It looked a little like a void fear or a Zerg queen. They had many strange joints on their body, which were all failed mutations. It was even possible to find some parts that looked like the body parts of other demons. These monsters basically had no brain and only had the most primitive nature of chaos and killing instinct. However, this did not mean that they were easy to deal with because the alien demon's strength, vitality, and dexterity were all increased by 25 points. Alien demon, high demon, large otherworld creature, large chaotic evil creature, grade 5, challenge rating 18+, monster level 21+, has spell-like abilities, highest and lowest attributes, 35 and 3, total attributes, 100 to 125, special abilities, chaotic will, battle instinct, desire to kill, high demon special ability, bite attack, frenzied attack, challenge difficulty, S+, challenge difficulty, S+. Although they were inferior to the Baylors in terms of life form, they weren't much weaker than the Baylors in a real fight. That's right. Although Soren did not want to say it, the hideous monster in front of him was actually the original form of the Slaughterer transformation. They were called Slaughterers by the demons. A terrifying monster that was completely dominated by chaos and filled with the desire to kill. Haha. It was a little ironic, wasn't it? In fact, Soren had long expected that one day, he would encounter a real slaughterer. The appearance of the alien demon changed the tide of the battle. This incomparably terrifying monster moved its huge body that weighed more than 8,000 pounds. Its body was the most dangerous weapon. All kinds of terrifying spiked limbs could easily cut through steel armor. Its ferocious bloody mouth could crush everything in the blink of an eye. Even iron blocks could be chewed into pieces and swallowed into its stomach with crunching sounds. In theory, they could eat anything and everything could be digested by their terrifying stomach acid. Their skin was tougher than dragon skin and had very high physical resistance. Most control abilities were ineffective against them, and their chaotic will made them immune to all mind control spells. Because they were already chaotic enough, this kind of chaotic creature was hard to control even for a demon lord. Once they were summoned, they could do whatever they wanted. Ah! A shrill scream sounded. The alien demon relied entirely on its combat instincts to move. In just one round of effort, it had bitten off the lower body of a paladin at the cost of having one of its arms chopped off. Drops of demon blood fell to the ground. Soon, green smoke rose from the ground. Then, a small pit could be seen where the blood had landed due to corrosion. Slaughterer,'s original form. Now that this thing was summoned, the paladin was in a bad situation. Chapter 444. Thinking about the state of Soren when he transformed into the Slaughterer, one could understand how difficult this thing was to deal with. In the face of the huge Slaughterer that weighed more than 8,000 pounds, the defensive formation of the paladins did not seem to exist at all. No one could resist this kind of monster. The suppression of strength and size was too obvious. The crushing ability of this monster was stronger than that of the Baler. It had a huge body, but its movement speed was quite fast. The high-speed movement of the alien matrix-like body coupled with terrible lethality made the paladin suffer heavy losses in the blink of an eye. But this was just the beginning. After the demigod vampire retreated for a while during the fight, he immediately rushed into the formation of the paladins. Soren was still unable to determine the profession of the demigod vampire. He could only be sure that he had the racial bonus of vampires, extremely high movement speed, powerful combat power, and various terrible magic abilities. There was a racial penalty for vampires to advance into a profession, so his own profession level would certainly not be too high. But if he added the racial talent of vampires, as well as the abilities and divine bonuses obtained after becoming a god, then he was more dangerous than the Hellpemer. Sunburst. A terrible strong light broke out in the dark underground space. Whether it was the paladins present, the demigod vampire, the Hellpemer, or Soren, they were all affected by this spell. But obviously, the enemy was more seriously affected. Clang. With the power of Sunburst raging, a paladin who had been holding back also rushed out. He instantly pulled out the sword at his waist and directly swooped down to slash at the Slaughterer in front of him. Evil slash. A holy radiance appeared. The sword seemed to be shrouded in an indescribable force. In just a moment, half of the Slaughteurer's body was cut open, and even the internal organs could be seen clearly. Holy Avenger. The penetrating power of this divine artifact was enough to ignore the resistance of the mutated demon. The paladin holding the Holy Avenger, Karsamir, was so powerful. Every time he attacked, he could leave a terrible wound on the Slaughterer. At the same time, the power of the divine artifact automatically added the ability of holy damage after hitting the enemy, and also produced a legendary level dispel magic effect. This world was still very kind to Saint Samurai. Among the most powerful artifacts in the material plane, two of them were exclusively used by paladins. One was the Holy Avenger, and the other was the Pale Justice. A Tier 5 divine weapon was more than enough to crush a high demon. The Slaughteurer's injuries were getting worse and worse, while the paladin wielding the Holy Avenger was completely unharmed under the protection of his companions. The situation of the battle was being reversed bit by bit. If the summoned slayers were killed, then the paladins, who had a clear advantage in numbers and wielded divine artifacts, would undoubtedly have a higher chance of victory. Moreover, Saint Samurai were good at restraining evil powers, and their ability to restrain evil powers made up for part of the gap in strength. However, in the face of such a situation, neither the demigod vampire nor the Hellpemer panicked. They were still closing in little by little, especially the demigod vampire who was fighting with the warden. He was using the advantage of high-speed movement to bring the warden closer to the rear of the paladin's front line bit by bit. The distance between them changed little by little. The vampires were even getting closer to the clerics and the paladins who were holding the Holy Avenger. At this distance, Soren couldn't help but think of something bad. Oh no. Soren suddenly felt something, and his whole person rushed out of the shadows in an instant. His figure flew out and seemed to be ready to rush into the battlefield at this time. But everything was too late. Saint's domain, time stop. Soren didn't know if these paladins in front of him had any experience fighting against the saints, but from the looks of it now, they shouldn't have much experience. Because the way they fought was obviously the way they dealt with ordinary legendary figures. Even Vivian could cast the legendary spell, Time Stop. As one of the most powerful sons of fear, it was impossible for vampiric Reinhardt to not master one or two legendary spells after he became a god. Time stop. Even time had stopped. Then what was the point of fighting? Everyone else present was suddenly shrouded. Whether it was the warden or the clerics, they were all still in place. Even the nearby Helpimer was motionless in place. He was not a demigod. No matter how strong a legend was, they could not be immune to the effect of time stop. Haha. The demigod vampire let out a strange laugh, and his figure flew out. His first target was not the paladin holding the Holy Avenger, but the spellcaster standing behind the defense line. A violent burst of magic aura. However, these activated defensive force fields all cracked like eggshells. The demigod vampire easily broke through all the defensive spells, and in the blink of an eye, he dug out a still-beating heart from the clergy's chest. Time stop was still in effect. The paladins who were hit all at once couldn't hold on until the end of the spell. The attack of the saint easily broke through their defense. Even if the demigod vampire was a weak god, he was still a god after all. The second target was the paladin. Pure physique, tough immunity, legendary physique, and epic strength. In front of the demigod vampire in the form of a saint, these were just a second or two more. Within the effect of time stop, he could easily finish the battle. A cold light flashed. The vampire even easily hit the paladin holding the Holy Avenger again, and at the same time, he was ready to take the opponent's life in the next attack. Since you guys are so persistent, you're courting death. Then I will naturally fulfill your wish. As soon as the voice of the demigod vampire fell, a cold light suddenly stabbed from behind him. Soren's expressionless figure appeared, and the curved sword icing death mercilessly stabbed at the opponent's heart. The racial talent of the vampires was too abnormal. If you wanted to kill them, you could only attack certain positions. How is this possible? The demigod vampire's face was full of astonishment, an expression of disbelief. With the cold light, Soren directly broke through the energy defense field on his body and stabbed the enemy's heart with his sword. But at this moment, the demigod vampire seemed to have triggered other defensive abilities, and a second energy defense field directly blocked Soren's attack. The defense was not broken. There were many defensive spells in the form of a saint. Soren had already expected this and did not hesitate to stab again. Shadow Strike. In the face of Soren's continuous offensive, the figure of the demigod vampire suddenly turned into a blood-red gas, and then instantly left his attack range. Vaporized form. The gas returned to human form at an amazing speed. The demigod vampire was shocked and said, "Who?" Until now, he had not seen Soren's appearance. Evade sight. Soren retreated into the shadows at the moment when the enemy vaporized. The anti-detection cloak, which was comparable to a divine artifact, made the demigod vampire unable to see his existence with his eyes. Immune to my time stop. Who is it? Are there other gods nearby? The demigod vampire's expression was a little surprised, and he was very cautious to keep a distance. He could not see the trace of the enemy, and he could not detect it when he quietly approached him. Everything told the demigod vampire that the enemy was not simple. It was just a sword that broke his energy defense field, and the enemy had the ability to seriously injure or even kill him. Soren disappeared in place. But at this moment, he did not continue to attack the demigod vampire, but turned and rushed to the paladin who held the Holy Avenger. Ah! A holy light emerged. Soren held the Holy Avenger in his palm and there was a burning pain. The pain seemed to penetrate into his soul, and his whole body could not help but tremble. But all this was just in a flash. The next moment, Soren let out a low roar, holding the Holy Avenger in both hands, and turned into a stream of light to cut the demigod vampire in front of him. Omnipotent hands. Chapter 445. Dang! At this critical moment, a cold light suddenly flashed under the noble dress inlaid with gold and silver thorns on the demigod vampire's body, and then it blocked Soren's attack in the blink of an eye. Then the cold light disappeared again, and the figure of the demigod vampire took 3 steps back in a row. The cold light came from his cuff, which could be determined to be some kind of short weapon, not more than 15 centimeters long. Hidden sword? Is he an assassin? Soren's pupils shrank slightly, and he rushed forward again, and the Holy Avenger directly slashed down. Sword form, beheading. In the face of Soren's fierce attack, the demigod vampire was no longer able to attack others. Soren's explosive power under the slaughter transformation was amazing, and the continuous offensive forced the demigod vampire to retreat again and again. The retreat was not because he was afraid of Soren's strength, but because he was very afraid of the Holy Avenger in his hand, because even the incarnation of the Holy Avenger did not have the ability to resist the attack of this artifact. Hold human body spell. The demigod vampire tentatively cast an instantaneous spell. However, Soren's footsteps did not stop at all, and even his own test of immunity did not trigger, because a row of data appeared in front of him, affected by the target. Hold human, effect. Magic resistance ability was triggered. Holy Avenger's magic resistance is in effect. Lich Ring +5 magic resistance is in effect. You are directly immune to the effect of this spell. The Holy Avenger's magic resistance was 50%, and any spell on the owner of this artifact had a 50% chance of being completely ineffective. The Lich Ring +5 also had 10% magic resistance, and when the two were stacked, it was 60% magic resistance. According to normal luck, a 10-sided die, Soren would only trigger the spell if he was unlucky enough to throw 1 to 4 points. Otherwise, it was basically difficult for ordinary spells to affect him. And even if it affected Soren, it would have to go through Soren's test of immunity again before it would take effect. However, Soren had another unique ability, Blessing of the Misfortune Goddess. The effect of this blessing was to reduce Soren's opponent's bad luck by 1 point, while Soren's own luck wouldn't drop below the standard. The blessings of the Misfortune Goddess could not make someone's luck explode. However, she was able to prevent bad luck from befalling someone. In fact, Soren rarely encountered bad luck, especially during battles. He was always able to perform above average. Up until now, he had never encountered such a situation where he stepped on something out of bad luck or encountered an unexpected situation. In the current situation, the effect of the blessing of the Misfortune Goddess was immeasurable. Law command, intimidate. Disintegrate. Finger of death. Misdirection. Maze. The demigod vampire's spellcasting ability was quite amazing. As a saint after being apotheosized, his spellcasting level was far beyond Vivian's. In the face of Soren's fierce attack, the demigod vampire, who was afraid of the power of the Holy Avenger and did not dare to fight him head-on, could only constantly cast various instantaneous spells to attack while retreating. No one knew how powerful the legendary instantaneous ability he had mastered. Anyway, all of his spells so far had no casting process, and all of them were rushing towards Soren like a storm. If there was no Holy Avenger in his hand, Soren would have been seriously injured or even dead at this moment. However, with the Holy Avenger, Soren directly ignored these spells. Law command, intimidate. Ignore it. Disintegrate. Ignore it. Finger of death. Ignore it. Misdirection. What's the use of this thing? Maze? This seems to be a bit troublesome. But before Soren could dodge, the spell was directly ineffective. It seemed that it was not because of the Holy Avenger, but because he seemed to be automatically immune to spells like Maze when he was in the slaughter form. The power of the artifact was so amazing. Soren used to rely on his immunity to resist the spells, and even if he resisted, he would still suffer some damage. But now, he did not suffer any damage at all. Unless the 60% magic resistance was broken, then the magic resistance would trigger the damage immunity, which ultimately determined how much damage Soren would suffer. For example, Finger of Death. If the 60% magic resistance was not broken, then it would be ineffective directly. If the 60% magic resistance was broken, then Soren would have to face a mandatory test of fortitude. If he failed, he would die directly. If he succeeded, he would suffer less damage, and this damage would also be weakened by a certain degree of his own resistance. With the Holy Avenger in hand, any spell must break Soren's 2 tests of fortitude before it could hurt him. Damn it. The demigod vampire's face was getting worse and worse. He muttered in his heart, what kind of monster is this? Even if he has the Holy Avenger, all the spells should not be ineffective, right? He gritted his teeth. The figure of the demigod vampire instantly turned into a gaseous state, and then at the moment when time stop was about to end, he raised his hand and launched his most powerful instant spell. Energy Drain, legendary spell. Since the enemy was so strong, then he could only rely on Energy Drain to erode the opponent's ability and let his strength be greatly reduced first. This spell again. Soren's face finally changed a little. He had suffered a lot because of this spell in the past. If he had not found a way to restore his ability, he was afraid that he would have a headache for a long time. In the current situation, if Soren was hit by this spell, there was basically no need to fight. It would completely destroy his rhythm in an instant. However, there was no place to hide at this time. At such a close distance, it was impossible to avoid an instant legendary spell. He could only rely on his own resistance to resist it. Now that he was in the form of Slaughter, with the Holy Avenger and the +5 Lich ring in his hand, he did not believe that he would be unlucky with the blessing of the Misfortune Goddess. With so many advantages added together, he could not resist this legendary spell. A row of data appeared in front of him, attacked by the legendary spell, Energy Drain. Magic Resistance ability activated. Holy Avenger's magic resistance is in effect. Lich Ring's +5 magic resistance is in effect. Slaughter resistance is in effect. You are completely immune to the effect of this spell. Past. Soren was directly immune to the effect of this legendary spell. At this moment, even Soren had a feeling that he wanted to laugh and murmured in his heart, too powerful. It's really too powerful. Is this the power of the legendary artifact? No wonder so many people fought for the Holy Avenger and Pale Justice back then. In his memory, both artifacts had caused an uproar, but they were both paladin equipment. Soren had no interest in them in the past. Today, if it weren't for omnipotent hands, he wouldn't have been able to pull up the Holy Avenger. Shadow Leap. The powerful power of the artifact made Soren full of confidence for the next battle. With such high magic resistance, he had no worries at all. As for the ability to fight, Soren did not believe that anyone could beat him with a 5th grade artifact. +15 sharpness, +10 penetration, +15 toughness, +10 armor break, +10 holy damage. This completely crushed the effect of the legendary curved sword, Icing Death. Soren was confident that he could cut an adult dragon into pieces in a minute. The effect of time stop ended. However, a battle of this level could have amazing changes in a second, so no one had time to communicate. Soren's Shadow Leap once again rushed in front of the demigod vampire. Sword form, spinning strike. The Holy Avenger drew a holy light and directly cut the demigod vampire in front of him. An invisible energy defense field was activated. The demigod vampire in the form of a saint had many defensive means, and the first attack was not enough to break all his protective energy shields. But at the moment of contact, a holy light also appeared on the Holy Avenger, target hit. Holy Avenger, Dispel Magic, effect triggered. Dispel Magic test passed. Target's high-grade energy shield dispelled. Dispel Magic. Any enemy hit by the Holy Avenger, as long as they had any spell effect on their body, whether it was energy protection, elemental resistance, or bull's strength, cat's grace, fox's cunning, etc. As long as it was a buff spell effect on the body, once hit by the Holy Avenger, it would automatically trigger a legendary level dispel magic effect. This weapon had made many spellcasters suffer in the past. Dang! The sound of weapons colliding sounded again. The demigod vampire had no choice but to resist Soren's attack again, and this time, new data appeared, target hit. Holy Avenger, dispel magic, effect triggered. Dispel magic test passed. Target's high-grade haste spell dispelled, in an instant. The demigod vampire's movement speed and attack speed were significantly reduced. He avoided the edge of the Holy Avenger and seemed to want to get out of Soren's attack range. But how could Soren let the enemy get away at this time? He instantly activated the +5 lich ring on his finger, and the speed of the whole person was as fast as a shadow in an instant. Greater haste. Soren's eyes were filled with endless killing intent. The whole person was like a whirlwind, and the terrible attack even formed a sword of air. On the other side, the warden, who was out of time stop, stood in place in shock and murmured, "How is it possible? He can use the Holy Avenger. There's more. How can a rogue use the legendary Blademaster's whirlwind?" P.S. This is the first update, there are 2 more updates today. Chapter 446. It's him. When they saw Soren's figure, the paladins who had seen him before immediately recognized his identity. But there was no time for them to think so much at this moment, because the outcome of a battle in the legendary realm could be decided in a flash. They did not know why Soren appeared at this time, why Soren could pick up the Holy Avenger, and why Soren could use the legendary warrior's whirlwind skill. But this did not affect their knowledge that the battle had taken an amazing turn. There was no time to mourn their dead comrades. The Saint Samurai gripped their long swords firmly and charged forward again with silver shields in hand. Soren had obviously suppressed the demigod vampire. As long as they separated him from the Hellpemer, they could find a way to stall the demon. Then the battle would be completely on the side of justice. After killing the demigod vampire, their strength would be obviously suppressed. No matter how strong the Hellpemer was, it was impossible for him to deal with so many paladins alone. The most important thing now was not to let the Hellpemer interfere with Soren. Once Soren's offensive was interfered with, the outcome of the battle would be difficult to predict. The Hellpemer was a high-grade legendary profession. Once he formed a short pincer attack with the demigod vampire, it was possible to injure or even kill Soren in an instant. The paladins present were veterans who had survived hundreds of battles. They knew very well what the consequences of such a thing would be. Divine Realm, courage. The warden did not have time to think about why he could use the Holy Avenger. At the moment when the Hellpemer moved, he smashed the warhammer in his hand on the ground, and then the surging current raged out. This was a very powerful legendary equipment. The jumping electric current obviously affected the Hellpemer's movement. The warden quickly flipped open the black codex in his hand. As he pressed his hand on the codex, a pure and holy power burst out. He said in a deep voice, "Justice, courage, holiness, glory, sacrifice." An indescribable power broke out and covered the whole battlefield in an instant. Divine Realm, sacrifice. Everyone nearby was instantly covered by the divine realm of the legendary paladin. Even Soren, who was in the middle of the battle, saw a row of data quickly appear in front of him, affected by divine domain, courage. You will gain an additional 1 courage point for all judgment effects in battle. Immune to all fear effects. His resistance to the corrosion of negative energy had increased. All nearby allies will gain 3 points of morale. A divine light bestowed courage upon the others. The second beam of holy light split into 3 and directly affected the 3 people nearby. One was a heavily injured Saint Samurai, one was a spellcaster, and the last one was Soren. Soren saw another data prompt appear in front of his eyes. Affected by divine domain, sacrifice. 10% of any damage you receive will be transferred to your protector. Additional 3 points of strong resistance. Additional 3 points of willpower resistance. Legendary Paladin. In this world, there were very few paladins who could reach the legendary realm, but once they reached the legendary realm, their strength would be greatly improved. Because of faith. The power of faith was so powerful. Paladins were born with a difficult and bumpy path. They were destined to face more difficult tests than other professions, but it also made their faith stronger. Legendary paladins had legendary abilities such as armor skin, epic strength, perfect physique, and so on. Among all professions, paladins were always the top meat shields that could be ranked in the top 3. Sword form, waist slash. The power of the courage domain made Soren's attack more and more unstoppable. The desire to fight after transforming into a slaughterer met with the power of courage was like adding fuel to the fire. Shadow leap. There was a phrase called shadow following, which was perfect to describe Soren at the moment. The natural environment of the Underdark was very suitable for Soren to fight, and his familiarity with the terrain was a hidden advantage. No matter how the demigod vampire tried to get rid of Soren, he would be stuck to him. Occasionally, the opponent would use a little trick to open up a gap, but then Soren would activate the ability of Shadow Leap and instantly stick to him again. At this moment, the demigod vampire was about to go crazy. This was simply going too far. Is this how a rogue fights? Do you think you are a barbarian? If it weren't for the fact that spells were ineffective and he was afraid of the power of the Holy Avenger, the demigod vampire would really want to tear the guy behind him into pieces. Since he woke up as the son of fear, he had never been chased like a dog like today. And what the hell was this momentum that was getting more and more powerful? Courage domain. Soren had already activated the slaughterer form, and the desire to fight in his heart was quite strong. Now, with the blessing of the legendary paladin's courage domain, it could be said that his momentum at the moment had reached the peak. In this case, 1 + 1 was definitely greater than 2. Soren's current state was like a meeting on a narrow path. There should have been a sentence of, "The brave will win," but in fact, before the demigod vampire had time to build up his momentum, Soren's anger had already exploded. "You are cheating." The demigod vampire was going crazy. Fight? There was no guarantee that he could resist the attack of the Holy Avenger. Run? This guy is chasing me so energetically and has the ability of shadow jump. I can't escape at all. Soren was not worried about the demigod vampire escaping at all, because his shadow jump was still more than 100 meters away, and he still had one chance to use shadow jump. This distance was longer than most of the flash teleportation spells. As for the longer distance teleportation, with Soren so close, the demigod vampire didn't even have a second to cast a spell. Want to cast a spell? Only instant cast spells could be cast. The storm-like attacks finally forced the demigod vampire to have no way to retreat. Facing Soren, who was chasing after him, the demigod vampire finally gritted his teeth and resisted. Then, after being hit by the Holy Avenger, he removed a blessing spell and activated a special spell unique to the gods. Summon Dark Servant. Vampire Priesthood. The priesthood of the gods was naturally not just to expand the scope of absorbing believers. In fact, most of the priesthoods had their own unique abilities. For example, the Queen of Spiders, Crafty, field directly disabled a psionic warlock with a profession level of more than 30. However, the vampire priesthood activated by the enemy was naturally not as powerful as the Queen of Spiders. This was a summoning spell derived from a priesthood, and it belonged to the legendary level of summoning. Boom! The teleportation channel was formed in an instant, accompanied by a black fog. In an instant, 2 or 3 figures rushed out of it with great speed. High-grade vampires. One of them was obviously close to the legendary level. These vampires rushed to Soren as soon as they appeared. Apparently, they intended to delay him under the command of the demigod vampire. Shoo! Soren rushed over with no expression and instantly waved his sword and cut a high-grade vampire in half. At the same time, Soren's palm gently pressed on the ground, and the surrounding space immediately vibrated. A portal connected to the elemental plane was opened. Elemental Legion, legendary spell. The power of the elemental stone was activated by Soren, and a gust of wind blew in the portal connected to the elemental plane. Then an elder of the wind elemental rushed out of the portal. The wind was raging. The elder of the wind elemental raised his hand and a bolt of lightning struck the high-grade vampire. Then, scorching flames surged out, and the figure of a giant fire elemental flew out of the portal. In an instant, the nearby ground was scorched black. Finally, heavy footsteps sounded. A figure that seemed a little too big and took a little effort to slowly walk out of the portal appeared. The portal closed. The Elemental Legion summoned an elder of the wind elemental, a giant fire elemental, and a giant earth elemental. At this moment, the eyes of the demigod vampire almost popped out. He finally seized the opportunity to summon the Dark Servants. He wanted them to delay Soren and buy time for himself. But he didn't expect that in the blink of an eye, the enemy launched the Elemental Legion and summoned a lot of elementals. This guy did it on purpose, right? The demigod vampire was about to go crazy at this moment. What made him even crazier was that he still didn't know who the enemy was. What the hell are you? Where the hell did you come from? Are you a rogue, a paladin, or a barbarian? Why do you know Whirlwind? Why can you use the Holy Avenger? Why can you use the Holy Avenger to summon Whirlwind? Why can you summon the Elemental Legion when you use the Holy Avenger to summon the Elemental Legion? What the hell are you? P.S. Second update, one more update today. Chapter 447. Take advantage of the situation. After so many life and death battles, Soren had already told him that he must not give the enemy a chance to breathe. Once the enemy had a chance to breathe, the situation could be reversed in an instant. Whirlwind. Soren didn't know any Whirlwind at all. If he knew the legendary skill, Whirlwind, he would have the ability to simulate the legendary Bladestorm. Double the attack speed, double the movement speed. In the entire material plane, the number of melee professions who could master Whirlwind was less than 2 digits, and nearly half of them were legendary sword saints. Soren now looked like he was using Whirlwind, but in fact, it was just because his attack speed was very fast, and his high dexterity combined with greater haste gave people the illusion of activating Whirlwind. Note, Whirlwind needs the power of Chi as support. As for the legendary Bladestorm, this was not a combat ability, but a combat skill that was accidentally combined in the War of the Holy Saints. The name, Bladestorm, was also given by the adventurers themselves. Because other than this name, there was no other name that could describe that kind of peak combat ability. At present, in the entire material plane, only one orc sword saint with a profession level of 27 could do this. Whirlwind, combined with Whirlwind, legendary Whirlwind slash, legendary Deadly Strike, insight into weakness, and finally, greater haste, formed a god-killing combat ability. Soren was lucky enough to see this battle. The Sword Saint's attack directly formed countless real sword auras. That was why people called it Bladestorm. Another similar Godslayer combat ability was also created by the Sword Saint, but it relied on simulacrum and true mirror image. When it came to the pursuit of physical damage, the Sword Saint had indeed embarked on a very extreme path. Holy Radiance. Soren's figure had exceeded the limit of what ordinary people could see with their naked eyes. If they wanted to lock his position, they could only rely on other methods. As a level 6 spell, the effect of greater haste was quite amazing. Even without the support of the two-handed sword ability, Soren still gave people the illusion of activating Whirlwind by relying on omnipotent hands and greater haste. Sword form, spinning strike. Soren's figure was like a shadow, and the Holy Avenger turned into a flowing holy light, directly blocking all the escape routes of the demigod vampire. Clang! Clang! There was a continuous sound of collision. Every time Soren swung his sword, the demigod vampire would take a step back. The light of dispelling magic continued to appear. In the end, the demigod vampire no longer had any energy defensive force field on him, and even his own support spells were all removed. Crack. A very crisp cracking sound was heard. When Soren used the spinning dance to turn it into a heavy slash, the hidden blade of the demigod vampire could no longer withstand the attack of the Holy Avenger and broke into 2 pieces. A row of data appeared. Battle breakthrough. You've leveled up in battle and grasped some information about whirlwind slash. Battle breakthrough. You've leveled up in battle and grasped some information about whirlwind slash. Battle breakthrough. You've leveled up in battle and grasped some information about whirlwind slash. You've learned a new battle skill, whirlwind slash. 3 data prompts appeared in a row. But this was just the beginning. Soren's storm-like attacks continued to appear. Battle breakthrough. You've leveled up in battle and grasped some information about slash. Battle breakthrough. You've leveled up in battle and grasped some information about fierce attack. Battle breakthrough. You've leveled up in battle and grasped some information about whirlwind. 3 more data prompts appeared in a row, and Soren's eyes no longer showed other data displays. At this moment, he seemed to be at the peak of a battle. Whether it was his own explosive power, fighting will, or comprehensive attributes, they had all reached a current critical point. The Paladin's realm of courage pushed this critical point to the limit. Shadow leap. Whirlwind slash. Soren's figure rotated at high speed, and the Holy Avenger turned into a storm that cut everything around him. The sword form, whirlwind slash, itself was a weakened ability of whirlwind slash. In the case of a breakthrough, Soren finally showed the real whirlwind attack. Poochie. A stream of blood splashed out. In the horrified eyes of the demigod vampire, the enemy's explosive power seemed to be getting more and more amazing. What's going on? Why does this guy in front of me seem to become more dangerous in the blink of an eye? Divine Shield. In the face of Soren's endless crazy attacks, the demigod vampire finally activated his last life-saving means. Divine Power Field. Since he became a god with the vampire clergy, his divine power had been slowly growing. He rarely used this power because even for the gods, divine power was a very precious power. But at this time, he couldn't care so much. In front of the powerful lethality of the Holy Avenger, the defensive ability of his saint form could be completely ignored. If he didn't activate the divine power field, Soren could tear him apart in minutes. Buzz. The burst of divine power formed a shock wave. It directly shook Soren's figure out. The Holy Avenger also seemed to have cut into some powerful invisible energy field and was directly isolated around the demigod vampire. A row of data appeared. You've been attacked by the divine power shock wave. Test of fortitude triggered. Test of constitution triggered. You've received 10 damage transferred, points of divine power damage. Attack hit. You've dealt 75, plus 10 holy damage, points of slashing damage to the target. Target activated divine power field shield. Cut divine power field. You've consumed 120 points of energy of the divine power field. Finally, he was forced to activate the divine power field. Soren raised his hand to wipe the blood from the corner of his mouth. His eyes were full of endless fighting spirit, and he rushed up again in an instant. Saints. Powerful incarnations of gods. Only when they were forced to use divine power could it be considered a real battle to kill a god. Otherwise, all efforts were just a joke. You can't even force out the divine power field, and you still want to kill a god? Dream on. During the catastrophe of the Saints' descent, there was a sentence that best described the current battle situation. Because at that time, a legendary warrior said so. It's time to put on the bayonet. Put on the bayonet. These 3 words represented how dangerous the real battle to kill a god was. forcing the incarnations of the saints to the point of activating the divine power field. At this time, almost everyone had used up their trump cards. In this case, what determined the outcome was their own fighting spirit, because both sides were close to running out of ammunition and food. The demigod vampire's expression was a little crazy. He never dreamed that since he awakened the power of the Son of Fear, he had encountered so many battles. He even fought with the chosen of the Lady of Wealth and personally defeated the chief priest of the Dread Lord. He had never suffered a big loss in so many battles, but today, in the hands of a guy who came out of nowhere, he was forced to the point of activating the divine power field. Once the divine power field was activated, for the gods, it was basically equivalent to fighting with their lives on the line. Otherwise, the Queen of Spiders would not be so furious that she wanted to kill them all. This was the last life-saving means of the gods. If even the divine power was used up, then they were really close to the end of the road. Soren's figure rushed up again. This madman! The demigod vampire gasped. When he saw the scarlet pupils of the opponent, he felt an inexplicable fear in his heart and instantly turned into a gaseous state to avoid it. Humiliation. This battle felt like a humiliation to him from the beginning to the end, because from the beginning to the end, he was like a dog being chased by the madman in front of him. The most unbearable thing for him was that he didn't even know who the guy in front of him was. He felt that he was going crazy. Chapter 448. Vampires were very powerful creatures. High-level vampires were comparable to liches. They were born with the ability to dominate humans. They could transform into bats, gas, monsters, and so on. They could also absorb energy to reduce the enemy's profession level by 2. Their natural racial characteristics gave them a very high damage reduction ability. At the same time, their claws and teeth were regarded as natural magic weapons. They themselves had the characteristic of quick healing. They had at least 12 HP, the same level as barbarians, and they also had natural extra armor plus 6. They were children of the night, and could create derivative. After transforming into a vampire, strength plus 6, agility plus 4, intelligence plus 2, wisdom plus 2, charm plus 4, and so on. However, all of these were actually useless. The demigod vampire was still being chased by Soren like a dog. All of his corrosive abilities were ignored by Soren's incomparable resistance. Dominate humans, absorb energy, transform, natural magic weapon, quick healing, damage reduction. Soren spun his two-handed sword like a windmill. No matter how high your damage reduction was, no matter how amazing your recovery ability was, as long as you were touched by the Holy Avenger, you would be turned into a human again in minutes. There was a saying, in the world of martial arts, only speed is invincible. Soren had no doubt that with his current explosive state, even if someone was shooting at him with a machine gun, he felt confident that he could block those bullets. At this moment, he finally experienced the feeling of the legendary Grand Swordsman blocking bullets with his saber during the Battle of the Golems. It was undeniable. Although Soren chose the path of a rogue, in fact, he had been influenced a lot by the Sword Saint. He had the extreme pursuit of the Sword Saint in his heart, but he did not have the belief of facing death with equanimity like the Sword Saint. In the case of pursuing both lethality and survival, Soren chose the path of a rogue. Perhaps all melee professions were more or less influenced by the Sword Saint. After all, the existence of the Sword Saint itself was a kind of benchmark. Speed, strength, burst, resistance, damage dealt, and opportunity presented itself. Soren did not doubt this at all. If he couldn't kill the demigod vampire today, then it would be even more difficult for him to kill him in the future. It was such a heaven-sent opportunity. He had obtained the Tier 5 divine equipment, Holy Avenger, under such circumstances, and he also had a bunch of Saint Samurai by his side. He did not have to face the followers of the vampire church as cannon fodder, nor did he have to worry about others interfering with his battle. To a certain extent, this was an opportunity that could not be replicated. Soren had to seize this opportunity no matter what. Shadow leap. Sword form, waist cut. Soren was able to wield a two-handed sword smoothly because his omnipotent hands allowed him to wield any weapon with ease. More importantly, Soren's combat techniques were all very violent, and they were all performed with heavy weapons. Regardless of whether it was sword form, heavy hack, sword form, beheading, sword form, waist chop, sword form, spinning strike, or other combat techniques, almost all of them could not be used with small or light weapons. Using a two-handed weapon was better than using a one-handed weapon. Especially when using sword form, waist chop, and sword form, beheading, the demigod vampire did not even dare to take any of them head-on. Clang! The holy light exploded like fireworks, and the expression of the demigod vampire became more and more ferocious. In the end, it was already a crazy look. At this moment, he had already lost the handsome aristocratic demeanor at the beginning. He was now disheveled and ragged. Because of anger and madness, his pupils gradually turned red, and his face became pale with a dark green gloominess. The corners of his mouth finally revealed very obvious fangs, the outline of his face became cold and cruel, his jaw was obviously sharp, dark green nails appeared on his fingers, and his skin seemed to have a metallic luster. Vampire form. Soren's second round of outburst finally completely angered the demigod vampire, so that he could no longer maintain his handsome and elegant appearance and revealed his true appearance. Damn you! I'm going to tear you into pieces. In the form of a vampire, Reinhardt's speed had obviously increased a lot. His dark green claws were covered with an indescribable radiance of energy. If other vampires had claws and fangs that were equivalent to natural magical weapons, then as the god of vampires, Reinhardt's claws must have reached the standard of legendary weapons. Clang! Sure enough, as Soren expected, the demigod vampire used his claws to parry Soren's attack. The collision of the two directly made a metal-like sound, but it was obvious that there was a clear sword mark on the demigod vampire's claws, and there were traces of holy energy burning on it. Although the recovery speed was very fast, the suppression effect of the Holy Avenger was still quite obvious. On the other hand, Soren, who was holding the Holy Avenger, had no problem. After a round of collision, Soren did not suffer any damage, but the demigod vampire received 10 points of holy damage and 15 points of shadow erosion damage. Shadow strike would take effect as long as it came into contact with the enemy. Not all of the damage was applied to the demigod vampire, and the shield effect of the divine energy field was still there. The opponent relied on his strong recovery ability to resist some of the damage, and the other part was transferred to the energy shield. I must break the critical point of his defense. Soren's pupils shrank slightly, and his whole person disappeared again. The next moment, the brilliance of the Holy Avenger was like a whirlwind, directly sweeping toward the demigod vampire in front of him. Clang! Clang! Gotcha! There was an obvious sound of breaking, and the demigod vampire's claws were directly cut in half by Soren. The divine energy field had weakened. Soren's crazy attacks were constantly reducing the strength of the divine energy field. As one of the most powerful weapons in the material plane, the Holy Avenger could even cause nearly 100 points of damage to the Queen of Spiders. Although the demigod vampire had a divine energy field shield, after withstanding so many attacks, it was finally on the verge of collapse. There was a hint of anxiety on the Hellheimer's face. He didn't know who the guy who suddenly appeared was, but he knew that the guy was very difficult to deal with. The demigod vampire in the form of a saint was suppressed by him, and the Hellheimer even doubted that he could withstand a few rounds of attacks. But now, even if he wanted to support, there was no way. The warden in front of him was biting him too hard. No matter how he gained the upper hand, it could not change one point, that was, the paladin had a clear advantage, and the warden in front of him was also a veteran legendary figure who had been famous for hundreds of years. Want to leave? The Hellheimer had no doubt that the other party had the ability to make him stay, and even take the opportunity to attack the already injured demigod vampire. But the battle could not continue like this. He had to support the demigod vampire, otherwise, it was only a matter of time before Reinhardt was defeated. The madman who suddenly appeared seemed to have gone berserk. Fallen Praise, Legendary War Song. The Hellpemer finally gave up relying on Prelude to Hell to interfere with the enemy's attacks, and chose to use Fallen Praise to buff the demigod vampire. The variables of the battle were still there. Although Slaughterer was seriously injured by the Holy Avenger, its strength was still not something that ordinary paladins could suppress. As long as those young paladins could not hold on, then Slaughterer would be able to get out of their control. At this time, the Hellpemer's opportunity came. As long as Slaughterer interfered with the other party a little, he could rush over to help the demigod vampire kill Soren. Now, it depended on who could hold on first. Was it the group of young paladins, or the demigod vampire who was currently being suppressed by Soren? For this, the Hellpemer still had a little confidence in his heart. No matter how badly Reinhardt was suppressed, he should be able to hold on a little longer than those paladins, right? The situation of the paladins was indeed very bad. Their casualties were actually very serious. At the beginning, when they were attacked by the demigod vampire and the Hellpemer, they had already lost the upper hand. Later, they were also hit by a time stop, which directly killed and seriously injured a few people. If it weren't for Soren appearing at that time, they would have been wiped out long ago. But now, although Soren suppressed the demigod vampire and affected the battle, their situation did not improve much. The warden had to delay the Hellpemer. The legendary clergyman died in battle under the time stop, and although the remaining young paladins were all above the advanced level, they had to delay the seriously injured and even crazier mutated demon. It was quite difficult to delay such a terrible monster. How else could they delay? Delay with their lives. The surviving young paladins were almost risking their lives. Among them, there was a figure that was so eye-catching. He was wearing mottled silver-white armor, standing in the front line against Slaughterer. The wind and frost around him made his slightly immature face reveal a sense of vicissitudes. The injuries on his body were actually very serious. Red blood dripped down from his fingertips, but he still did not retreat half a step. Because he could not. In this case, if he retreated, everyone would die here. Blood, tiredness, pain. He had already unknowingly begun to get used to these things. From the moment he left the City of Wealth, he walked for tens of thousands of miles on foot. Along the way, he ate the wind and slept in the open. He had seen too many things that he could not imagine in the past. He had fallen and lost his way, but he had regained his faith. He finally understood why there was always a trace of sadness in the eyes of the older paladins. Because his heart began to be filled with sadness. He was not lost, nor did he fall. His faith became firmer, and his will was as strong as steel. But his heart was still full of sadness. He did not give up on justice. He just did not know what had happened to this world. Chapter 449. The situation of the paladins was not good. A challenge rating of 21 was indeed not something they could deal with. If it weren't for one of the figures who was clearly covered in blood, but still relied on faith and will to fight in the front line, perhaps the demon would have rushed out long ago. This young paladin had been seriously injured. If it weren't for a paladin who was attacked by the demigod vampire at the beginning, he would have died under the claws and fangs of the demon. Unyielding will. No matter how strong his will and faith were, allowing him to still burst out powerful combat power in a seriously injured state, one thing was still unchangeable, that was, his vitality was constantly flowing away. And when his vitality was completely lost, no matter how strong his faith and will were, he could not change his fate of dying. Soren seemed to be aware of the change in the battle. His offensive became more and more violent, and he did not even dodge the counterattack of the demigod vampire. He directly relied on his strong physique and the strong resistance after transforming into a Slaughterer to fight the enemy head-on. The demigod vampire's celestial force field had been broken by Soren. Every attack of the Holy Avenger made the enemy's injuries rapidly worse. Even if the Holy Form had thousands of vitality, it could not withstand the Holy Avenger's head-on attacks. Poochie. Soren's chest was penetrated by the claws. Although it did not hurt his vital parts, it pierced his lungs, and suddenly his breathing became a little chaotic. Gotcha! The palm of the demigod vampire was directly cut off by Soren with the Holy Avenger, and one of the dark blue claws was suddenly missing. He did not even think about it and swung his sword again to cut the enemy's waist. Sword form, waist cut. With a cold light, the waist of the demigod vampire was directly cut in two by Soren. But just as his body was about to be cut by Soren, suddenly a smoke came out, and then the figure of the demigod vampire turned into bats flying in the sky. Bat form. The last life-saving means of high-grade vampires. This trick may be close to an unsolvable thing for many people, because in the face of flying bats, they did not know which one was the body of the demigod vampire. As long as the other party's main body escaped. In that case, all the previous efforts would be for naught. The saint form could heal his injuries in a very short time. However, the bats that filled the sky were not a problem for Soren. How many bats are there? He couldn't tell at first, but there were at least 100 of them, right? With so many bats flying out, it would be very difficult to capture the target's body. Therefore, Soren put away the Holy Avenger the moment the enemy turned into a bat. He had experience in dealing with legendary vampires and had already thought of a strategy to deal with them in their vaporized form and bat form. Even if he was facing the god of vampires, Soren still had a way to deal with these bats. Spinning slash. Clang. Soren's legendary curved sword icing death and another curved sword appeared in the palm of his hand. His figure rose into the air in an instant. Just as the body of the demigod vampire burst into bats, the two curved swords formed a terrible sword storm. The cold sword directly formed a curtain, sealing all the nearby space. How fast could the bats be? With the curved sword, legendary, ability, the slaughter form, all kinds of buffs, activated greater haste, his agility temporarily exceeded 30 points, and at the same time, he mastered greater dual wielding. How fast could Soren's swords be at this moment? Pada. 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 The vampire bats fell from the sky like rain. Before they could fly more than a meter, a large number of them had already fallen to the ground. In terms of attack speed, although Soren was not as good as the purebred blade master who had a basic speed +1 every 3 profession levels, he was confident enough to fight against any other melee profession with greater dual wielding. No matter how many bats the demigod vampire transformed into, they had to fly out of his body first. In such a narrow space and dense situation, it would be a joke if Soren's dual swords couldn't clean up these vampire bats at the same time. What kind of agile rogue was this? If he couldn't even kill these bats, he might as well find a piece of tofu and kill himself. Bang! The bats that burst in the black fog were instantly cleaned up by Soren, but because there were so many of them, there were still a few that escaped. Clang! Soren didn't say anything and directly threw out the curved sword in his hand. First, it was the spare rare curved sword, and then he threw out the legendary curved sword icing death. He instantly killed 2 bats that were a few meters away. There were still 3 bats left that escaped, and they fled in 3 different directions. Soren's expression was calm. The elven war bow +2 appeared in his palm. In an instant, he aimed at the bat on the left, and the arrow flew out instantly, killing one in an instant. Vampire bats were vampire bats after all. They would not suddenly become supersonic fighters. Even if there were a lot of them, they lost most of their effect after Soren's first round of attacks. Swoosh! The second arrow was shot at the bat on the right, and the arrow nailed the target at once. Shadow leap. Sword form, heavy hack. After killing the remaining vampire bats with 2 arrows, Soren didn't think much. He pulled out the Holy Avenger in an instant, and his figure disappeared in an instant. Then he jumped and slashed at the last vampire bat. Clang! The vampire bat turned into black smoke and returned to its human form. The demigod vampire tried to block Soren's attack with his claws, but what greeted him was a 3rd round of crazy attacks. Soren waved the Holy Avenger and attacked wildly. He almost completely gave up any means of defense. He directly pushed forward and instantly forced the demigod vampire into a corner. Plop. Soren's eyes were full of killing intent. At the moment when the two figures crossed, the Holy Avenger pierced through the heart of the demigod vampire. The holy light broke out. The holy power burned the heart of the demigod vampire into charcoal in an instant, but Soren did not hesitate at all. He pulled out his weapon in an instant and slashed at the head of the demigod vampire. Sword form, beheading. A ruthless cold light flashed, and the head of the demigod vampire was cut off. His lips moved slightly in midair. Who are you, Pada? A head fell to the ground, and the body knelt down weakly. Data appeared instantly, target killed. You've killed the god of vampires, Reinhardt. Extracting the target's soul energy. You've gained 115000 slaughter EXP. Alert. Alert. Interference by unknown energy. Extraction of slaughter EXP failed. Extraction of slaughter EXP failed. The target's soul energy has been extracted by an unknown target. You've gained 250,000 slaughter EXP. A strange melody began to play. Just when Soren's crazy attack forced the demigod vampire into a corner, the figure of the Hellpemer suddenly gritted his teeth and opened up a distance with injuries. Everything happened in an instant. When Soren pierced the heart of the demigod vampire and cut off his head at the same time. The Hellpemer also suddenly crushed the magic flute in his hand, and then an indescribable strange melody echoed around. Hell's Requiem. Legendary war song, Soul Trap. The target of the sudden burst of power was not the other people present, but the demigod vampire who died in an instant under Soren's hands. The Hellpemer was holding a strange black crystal in his palm. At the moment when Soren killed the demigod vampire, a strange blood-red color appeared on the black crystal, and then in the blink of an eye, it became blood-red, and the projection of a certain soul could be vaguely seen in it. The soul is imprisoned. Soren reacted in an instant, and without looking at the data prompts that continued to appear crazily behind him, he directly swung the Holy Avenger and slashed at the Hellpemer in front of him. Buzz! A strange thing happened. The figure of the Hellpemer suddenly disappeared like some high-level demons, leaving only a voice echoing, haha. No matter who you are. I'll come back for you. Soren was so angry that he almost went berserk. He swung the Holy Avenger and smashed it on the ground, roaring, bah. If you want to fight, come now. Son of a bitch. Unfortunately, the figure of the Hellpemer had already disappeared. The data was still jumping in front of Soren's eyes, but now was not the time to look at it. He stomped his feet with hatred, directly swung the Holy Avenger and rushed to the alien demon in front of him. This time it was really a miscalculation. Soren never dreamed that the Hellpemer would actually use the soul-sucking technique at that time, directly imprisoning the soul energy that he should have absorbed into the crystal. Slaughter EXP was essentially soul energy. The Hellpemer used the soul-sucking technique to imprison the soul of the demigod vampire, which was equivalent to absorbing most of Soren's slaughter EXP. How could Soren not go berserk? But fortunately, the demigod vampire was dead, and the soul-sucking technique could only take away the soul, but not the other forces in his body, so Soren only lost a large amount of slaughter EXP. The only thing that worried him a little was that the relationship between the Hellpemer and the demons was unclear. In this case, he suddenly made a move to imprison the soul of the demigod vampire, and he didn't know what he was planning. However, for now, it was better to kill the alien demon behind him first. A high-level demon could more or less make up for his losses. With the Holy Avenger in hand, there were not many good opportunities to kill people like this. Chapter 450. Soren was full. In fact, he had never felt as full as he did today after activating the Slaughterer transformation. This feeling was not brought about by killing the demigod vampire, but the satisfaction after killing the mutated demon. The slaughter thirst that troubled Soren after transforming into the slaughter seemed to have obtained an unprecedented satisfaction the moment he cut off the mutated demon's head with the Holy Avenger. All of a sudden, Soren was completely free from the influence of the slaughter thirst. He did not know why. Soren had no clue about this. He could only see a row of data in front of him: killed mutated demon. Extracting target's soul energy. You've gained 35,000 slaughter EXP. Unknown mutation. Extracting unknown energy. Divine power conversion. Unknown mutation in slaughter transformation. Slaughterer transformation in slaughter transformation. Divine power conversion complete. Partial demonic characteristics conversion. It was such a brainless data prompt. Killing the mutated demon did not give a lot of slaughter EXP, probably because its body was still in the bottomless abyss. Many summoned creatures would not really die because of this situation, such as high-level demons, and elementals. Although they had their own bodies, what really affected them was the characteristics of their souls, something that Soren could not figure out. The soul was too mysterious. High-level demons would definitely be affected to a certain extent after being summoned and dying, but they rarely really died because of this. Otherwise, the corpse of the summoned creature would not disappear as an energy form. Soren had a lot of data in front of him. Target killed. You successfully killed the god of vampires, Reinhardt. Target is in saint form. Extracting target's divine power. You've gained 9 divine points. Target has the ability of divinity. Absorbing target's divinity power. Extracting target's divinity. You've gained 5 divine points. This was the first row of data that appeared, but it was just the beginning. There were some data that Soren could not understand, but he could clearly feel that he seemed to have merged with some kind of power. Successfully killed a deity. You have successfully killed the god of vampires, Reinhardt, who has a weak divine power. You've received the legendary ability, God Slayer, Soren. Your existence is beginning to enter the eyes of the gods. God Slayer, Soren, legendary background ability. The moment you succeed in slaying a god, your existence will be noticed by many powerful beings in the multiverse. Whether it was the gods of the heavenly realm, the demons of the abyss, the devils of hell, or the evil gods in the dark corners, they all began to shift part of their attention to you. This was a display of power, and also a special challenge. Among the gods, there would be some who wanted to test whether you were qualified to join them, and there would also be some who wanted to kill those who challenged the rules. Whatever the case may be, your name has undoubtedly spread to many places in the multiverse. Legend plus 50, Intimidation plus 100, Negotiation plus 50. All of your trials of immunity will have an additional 1 Godslayer bonus. Soren understood this. After he killed the demigod vampire, he received a legendary background ability. It was similar to the blessing of the misfortune goddess, but the effect seemed to be more powerful. Unfortunately, the main thing was that the increase did not directly affect his combat ability. 50 points of legend was a little scary, and 100 points of intimidation. Soren estimated that he could scare a lot of people to death, right? As for the improvement of his negotiation ability, it should be the influence of the Godslayer's identity. The most important thing was still the 1 point of Godslayer bonus. Soren's powerful immunity resistance was accumulated little by little. He knew how important these basic things were in a high-end battle. Then there were other data notifications. Target killed. Target has the vampire divine title. Divine title extraction failed. You can't absorb any power of this divine title. Target has the hunting domain. Hunting domain extraction successful. You've received part of the information of the hunting domain. Divine power conversion. Hunting domain information converted to slaughter domain information. You've received a weak understanding of the slaughter domain. Target has the fear domain. Fear domain extraction successful. You've received part of the information of the fear domain. Divine power conversion. Ability improvement. Part of your fear divinity reproduction ability has improved. You've received a weak understanding of the fear domain. This was the initial data display. But there were some other data displays that made Soren a little confused. Target has the unabsorbed, half-elf, divine title. Current divine title and self-compatibility is 85%. Divine title extraction successful. You've received part of the information of the half-elf, divine title. Target has the unabsorbed, wanderer, divine title. Current divine title and self-compatibility is 91%. Divine title extraction successful. You've received part of the information of the wanderer, divine title. 2 information notifications. Then there was nothing else. In the beginning, Soren only absorbed the divinity domain, but he had received a very obvious improvement. But now he had even succeeded in extracting the divine title, but there was nothing else except these 2 pieces of information. Soren didn't understand. He felt that he had some kind of special sensing ability, but he didn't know why there was no data prompt. Not even a fart. It was as if the information of these 2 divine titles was completely out for a while, and then there was nothing else. Soren didn't understand, he didn't understand at all. But at this time, there was no way to delve into it, so he could only put it aside first. The body of the demigod vampire began to dissipate rapidly after death. The body of the saint form was special, unlike the flesh and blood of mortals. After the body of the demigod vampire dissipated, a special ring was left in the place, and then there was nothing else. The style of the ring was very simple, and it was engraved with the emblem of a vampire bat. Soren trembled for a moment when he touched it, and then quietly put it away. A divine artifact. Although he hadn't looked at it carefully, the moment he touched it, it gave Soren a similar feeling as when he pulled out the Holy Avenger. Tap, tap, tap. Soren slowly came in front of the paladins, and there was no trace of reluctance on his face. He directly threw the Holy Avenger over and said in a deep voice, "Catch." He couldn't take this sword. No matter how powerful it was, he couldn't take it unless he intended to go against the whole world of paladins. However, Soren also played a little trick. He didn't return the Holy Avenger to the warden, or the paladin who first held it, but directly threw it to the young paladin he had seen in the City of Wealth. Clang! The young paladin's expression was a little dazed. His broken silver armor was full of scars, and his cloak was stained with blood. When Soren threw the Holy Avenger over, he subconsciously reached out and caught it, and then the eyes of the others fell on him. He was seriously injured, but he still stood straight. Different from Soren holding the Holy Avenger, this artifact immediately emitted a dazzling holy light after it fell into his hand. The young paladin's expression was still very dazed, and he turned his eyes to the warden next to him. "You take it first." The warden's face was very surprised. One was that Soren would throw the Holy Avenger to him, and the other was that the Holy Avenger had such a strange change after falling into his hand. The Holy Avenger recognized this young man. Hee. Soren's mouth showed a smile. He gently tightened the anti-detection cloak and turned to walk into the darkness. "Stand firm in your beliefs. Young man. The future world will need your strength." This time, Soren didn't hide anything. His voice shocked the young paladin instantly, and he immediately looked up at his back. However, at this moment, Soren had gradually merged into the darkness and disappeared in front of their eyes. Only his words remained in place. It was thought-provoking. You're tuning into the Dreamy Love Stories YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.